Night Trap gets Lieberman's panties in a bunch. Id unleashes doom. And the Apple II is no more. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex.
Happy to be here, Carl.
Excellent. So, before we can turn on the time machine and head back 30 years to December of 1993... obligatory podcast banter. How are you doing, Alex?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Of course, the podcast is still running along. We've been focusing on the Mass Effect series, a rare episode that focuses on something that happened after the turn of the millennium, which we don't get into very often at They Create Worlds. But it's getting further and further in the past, Carl.
I know. I listened to the episode the other day, and number one, I was astonished the fact that they spent an entire year building the world, but it makes so much sense, and it it explains so much about that game. Truly, playing the Mass Effect trilogy, one of the highlights of my gaming career. Really,
same
really
here.
Great. Yeah,
absolutely love them. Don't let the Department of Corrections hear you say that, though.
I'm taking it, Ethan, not a fan.
That is my understanding.
Well, we will find out then next month, because I've already recorded the Department of Corrections for this month. So,
I thought this whole thing unfolded live before a studio audience. Carl, what are you saying?
No, sorry, the only laughter is my own at my own jokes. Yeah, I need to get out more. But we do have an interesting development to discuss and to announce. We're going to be doing our first joint live stream between the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine and They Create Worlds at February 25th. We're recording this in February of 2024. So last Friday of February, we're going to be getting together and doing an at least 2 hours, knowing us, who knows how long it'll actually run. And we haven't chosen a theme yet, but I'm sure that we will come up with something. We'll do some Q&A if you have any questions for us, and just general banter with our patrons.
I hear Enchantment Under the Sea is a popular theme.
Oh, we don't need to go that far back. I mean, I'm sure I'm totally blanking on themes right now. This is terrible. It's a good preview for the episode. Well, I had suggested either, since you recently did an episode on ball and paddle games, that we could maybe play some, because there's some really weird. There's, for example, the ZX Spectrum got an isometric one, which might
the words spectrum and isometric in the same sentence frightens me. I realize there were many isometric arcade adventures on it, but yes, in the context of an action game, that frightens me.
Oh yeah, exactly, as it should. It would be a fun one to try. There's so many variations on that theme, that weird ones that I can think of off the top of my head that I think would be awesome. Orb.
What if we took Ultimate Play the Game's Night Lore and turned it into Pong? That sounds brilliant.
It's kind of like a reversal, you know? It's like, but yeah, so We'll figure the theme out. We haven't gotten there yet. Who knows? We may just say no theme, see who shows up, and whatever you want us to do, we'll dance because you're paying our bills.
I don't think that's in my contract.
You didn't read the fine print, my lawyerly friend. This is...
Why did I, A, make a contract with a lawyer, and B, as someone with legal training myself, not read it first?
Hey. At least... Oh, wait, you didn't see the provision about what you had to wear during this thing? Ooh.
So, 1993, huh? I hear that was a fun year.
Oh, yeah, we've got plenty to talk about. We may be mentioning more than once that we've done a very special episode that's only up on YouTube. That's like 3 hours long where we're, about a hearing and some Senate thing with some dude called Joe. We'll get to that multiple times, no doubt, today.
Doesn't ring a bell, Carl.
No,
doesn't ring a bell.
Nothing at all. It's all a blur. We were drinking a lot. It's okay. But we will get to that. But before we can turn on the time machine, of course, first remind everybody we do have Patreon here for the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. And you can find the links in the pages below. Help us out, cover some of the bills. Also, just, it's a nice way of telling me you like me. You really like me. And also, all the links to our socials, to the YouTube channel, etc., etc. The YouTube channel has been picking up steam lately a little bit, so that's all good. The latest interview to go up early for the patrons is the first half of my interview with Michael Hengst. He's a games journalist from the 80s and 90s in Germany. In the first part, we just cover his time at legendary German magazine Power Play. And later on, in the second part, which will be coming in a couple of weeks, we talk about his career publishing official hint guide books, strategy guides for Nintendo and Eidos and other big companies like this. And then later on, his current profession, which is freelance game production. So he's usually brought in when projects are in trouble and has to reorganize. And we talk a lot about how companies succeed and or don't succeed in game publishing. Lots of great stories. He's one of the nicest guys in the world. The type of guy you just want to go out and have a beer with. So first half of that interview.
And it is in English, I think is important to mention at this juncture.
Yes, this is extremely important.
Since both of you could have certainly conversed in German on this.
Yes, this was one of the standard or one of the issues. This is one of the few times that people who are not German speaking are going to get an insight into the German industry of back then and even to today, because he mainly works with German publishers or German developers, but usually for international publishers. It's a weird relationship, the whole thing, the mechanics of it, very, very interesting. But yes, all in English. And yes, there is an audio issue at the beginning of the first interview. I even put a warning up on the sound file. I'm very sorry about that, but I had to record it while I was at work because the meeting went long and I was in a giant room that did not have very good soundproofing, so there's a little bit of an echo when I speak. But everything he says, you'll understand without a problem. Okay, that being said and that being done, let's move on to the first part of our show, and that is the 7 Minutes in Heaven, the segment where our intrepid co-host must play a game that was reviewed in in a magazine dated December of 1993 that they've never played before. And we had a lot of interesting titles this month. We had Lethal Enforcers on the Genesis, more about that game later. We had The Settlers on the Amiga, Cannon Fodder on the Amiga, Microcosm on the CD32, Mortal Kombat on the Amiga, that also would have been a fun one.
Yeah.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters on the NES. Wow, I was really going for the quality. No, well, I mean, Settlers and Cannon Fodder, obviously, amazing games.
Yes.
We had Sylphid on the, or Sylphid, is it pronounced Sylphid or Sylphid?
I do not know. I know the game, but I do not know the pronunciation.
Good question. Awesome Possum. I almost went for that one. I almost did. But no, we went with an absolute hardcore classic, namely Street Fighter II for the C64.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
It does exist.
Oh, yeah, baby.
In the same way that a person on a ventilator is still alive.
Okay, I have to admit, that was brilliant. Okay, we're giving up the pretense that you haven't already played this before we start talking. So, are you ready to play some Street Fighter 2 on the C64?
Let's do it.
Then let's do it. Okay. Welcome back, Alex, from your 7 minutes in heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Street Fighter 2 on the C64 based off of your 7 minutes with the game?
Well, Carl, Street Fighter II for the Commodore 64 is a drawing done in crayon by a 5-year-old of only mediocre artistic talent one day when he was sitting in an arcade someplace watching Street Fighter II get played, and then was submitted to a game company of some kind and turned into a final product.
That is a very, very accurate, disturbingly enough, description of the game. Now, you were familiar with Street Fighter II prior to entering into this particular venture, correct?
I thought I was, Carl, but I didn't realize that there were multiple planes of action, so perhaps I had not played as much Street Fighter II as I had once believed.
So you did not know that you would actually walk on the roof of the dojo on Ryu's stage, for example.
Things get weird there, Carl. Things get weird.
It's the advanced technology of 1982's Commodore 64 that makes it all possible.
In the words of another famous piece of art that came out in 1993, they spent so much time wondering if they could that they didn't think about whether they should.
Oh, brilliant, yes. So, just very, very briefly, a little bit of the background on this game. I do recommend... There's a lengthier video about this game by Nostalgia Nerd. I'll link to it in the show notes where he breaks this down in more detail. But the big and short of it is that US Gold had the license. They needed to get a game out before Street Fighter II Mania had died down. There was really no worry about that happening. They handed it to the same developer that had also done the conversion of Final Fight to the C64 a year or so earlier results. And
Carl tried to make me do that one too, if I remember correctly, and I said no.
Yes, I did try to do that, didn't I? I don't know where I come up with these great ideas. So, and Creative Materials, that company, was also busy doing the port to DOS, and so they didn't even bother programming this one in-house. They handed it off to a freelancer by the name of James McDonald. And James McDonald is a gent who could program stuff fairly well. He did a couple of shooters that were quite well received, but he also did one of the most infamously bad C64 ports of all time, which was Cisco Heat, which, if there was ever a justification for an epilepsy warning on a game, it is the C64 version of Cisco Heat, because he doesn't actually use sprites for it. He's straight up just using the 8x8 pixel tiles of the background for everything, and it's not pretty. Yeah, I see your eyes moving.
Sounds
did you just pull up a video of this?
It sounds like a terrible time, Carl. That's all I can say.
So Mr. McDonald was working on this, and then Creative Materials decided they were going to hire an outside graphics artist to redraw all the images, all the sprites, and the backgrounds to clean them up and make them more usable for the C64. And then they decided not to do that and simply imported imagery from the DOS version without cleaning any of it up. So the title screen looks like ass. The levels are, if you squint and you know what Street Fighter is supposed to look like, you can figure it out. But if you didn't, you have no idea what's going on. And yeah, the whole thing was a rushed, a botched job. And all I can say is the Amstrad CPC people got lucky. Their version was canceled. The ZX Spectrum version, well, that's its own level of hell. And yeah, so this is just the last dying breath of the C64's commercial gaming life, as everybody is abandoning the platform, and there are so many older games listed in budget catalogs that are really, really good that you don't kind of need to make any new ones. So yeah, I wanted to include it because it's a nice bookend to the opening salvo of the C64 software library, especially when games are concerned, with Commodore licensing arcade games like Wizards of War to give the games some to give the machine some street cred and make it commercially viable, and to see that one of the last major releases was an arcade conversion. In many respects, the last big arcade game phenomenon, Street Fighter 2. I mean, obviously not the last one, blah, 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 blah.
The last one that had, one of the last ones that had such huge impact in the home as well, since, things like DDR and, Daytona, not nearly so much.
Exactly. Although you can play basically DDR on a C64 nowadays.
I'm not surprised.
Done that, yeah. The SID chip is great. I've played it with a DDR mat hooked up to a C64. It's fun. Not graphically impressive, but fun. But yeah.
Yeah, don't think that's going to ever make 7 minutes in heaven so long as I'm co-host, Carl.
Never say never. That's what the Patreon thing is for. No. But yeah, so this is what it is. So, looking at it now, with the hindsight of many, many decades distance, would you recommend this game to modern players?
Absolutely. Go ahead and play this game and then follow it up by having a nice, relaxing root canal. For those that are not part of the sadomasochist community, however, probably just skip it.
That is probably very, very good advice. And remember, if you actually want to see what this game looks like, the Let's Play with commentary of Alex's 7 Minutes in Heaven is available to our patrons. So, click on the link below and you can go and watch it. Oh, and I should just mention one quick thing. We did use a hacked cart version that not only got rid of the massive load times of up to 7 minutes per match, but...
In other words, the entire length of the segment.
Exactly. But also replaced the fonts used, the character set used with something a little bit nicer, whereas the original one that shipped with the game would just use the default character set that was in Commodore 64 Basic. Yeah, that's the level of production values that we're dealing with this game. So, okay. Just thought I'd mention it before somebody is like, this isn't the real version. I know. Trust me, we didn't want to do that to ourselves. Like I said, Champion of the Raj, we've been there, we've done that. If you missed that, go back and check it out in the archive. Mads is probably still waiting for something to load on that game. Okay. With that being said, let's check in with our good friend Ethan to find out what we got wrong in our November 1993 jump in a little section we call the Department of Corrections.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan, to the Department of Corrections. So, before we can get started, I guess, with the...
November 1993.
Yes, errors.
You don't see what I see in Carl's eyes right now. See the destitution of a man who is so far gone. But hey, at least he's had fun recently. Carl, but before we get to the Alex comment, why don't you tell the listeners something you did recently that you don't normally do?
I actually played a game.
Yeah.
I played a game, people. I do a podcast about games, and I haven't played a game in forever. So, a little preview of interview that's coming up. I interviewed Graham Bayliss, who's a producer over at NetherRealms and has he has a 40-year career in games, and I think it's 6 hours of recordings that I now have to sift through and turn it into probably about a 3-parter, because this guy's career is just off the chain. And it's going to be very insightful, very fun. And I played Mortal Kombat 11, and I did not know story modes were that awesome. Yes, he was I believe the executive producer on the game, or some high mucky muck producer role. His credits on the first page the first screen of credits. So all I can say is it was an awesome experience. I can only recommend everybody go, and I paid for it, so it's not it's not one of those, I'm lauding it because of that, and it's also previous generation because I couldn't run Mortal Kombat 1, the new one, and that's all I got to say about that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, the Alex comment.
Yes.
November 1993. Alex singling out that quote with Kalinsky was a beautiful, beautiful thing. The trifecta Kalinsky quote. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, that was good.
All right, Carl, now we're going to pick out your beard hairs one by one here for the Department of Corrections. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Hit me.
Okay. So first of all, the Project Reality games in the arcade, Nintendo's little cross-promotional thing that they did. So, as far as I know, there is no hardware commonality between Cruisin' USA and the N64. I did look And I didn't see anything in particular that actually lines up. And basically, they've said this in later interviews. There's a whole section in the documentary Insert Coin that goes into this.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
Yeah. And highly recommended. Josh Sway is a very cool guy. I've gotten to meet him. So definitely recommend that if you're interested in the later Midway Williams games. There is one piece of crossover in terms of the Killer Instinct arcade cabinet. It did use the MIPS processor, MIPS being a company that SGI had bought previously, and then they put their name on this processor. And interestingly enough, that processor is actually what SGI was trying to sell, and that's when they came to Nintendo. It wasn't actually, it has anything to do with the graphics chip that they later developed for Nintendo. They were trying to sell them the CPU.
Ah, interesting. The CPU of all things.
Yes, because the CPU has a lot of the power that can help drive the polygonal stuff. But
that makes
that's
sense.
That's what Clark was going around and optioning, and that's what Tim Van Hook, the guy who led the stuff for Project Reality, had actually done initially. Is he had compressed basically a whole bunch of power from these SGI workstations onto this processor.
Gotcha.
But Killer Instinct was done before the specs of the N64 were finalized, because that took until about December 1994.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's not really the type of game that the N64 was designed to produce with its pre-rendered graphics and all that.
Yeah, and, when they did make the Killer Instinct game for it, it was entirely different.
Yeah. Well, it was Killer Instinct Gold.
Gold, yes.
Yes.
I do have that cartridge back here, just because I collect all the rare cartridges, the rare limited cartridges.
Gotcha. Have you gone back to get any of the Ultimate Play the Game cassettes, though?
No. Why would I do that?
Okay. Not going to say anything.
Then SGI again. Jim Clark. You mentioned that he was at the entertainment conference or whatever, and he was talking smack about 3DO. Interestingly enough, Jim Clark's first stop when he was shopping around the MIPS processor was 3DO.
That makes sense. I'd love to have seen that conversation. I mean, if he went to 3DO, whether or not he was invited in there, or if he actually went there on his own.
I believe that he went there because the MIPS processor was also used in at least one other device that doesn't have to do with the arcade games. That was a set-top box that Warner was developing. And Warner also got 3DO as, one of the content providers for that. So, however it worked out, basically Clark said they were already developing their hardware, so we didn't really have a chance to pitch it to them.
Okay. Well, and everybody hold that thought on set-top boxes and 3DO for a story we'll be covering later in this episode.
There you go. I believe that thing was called Project Genie or something like that. But it has the processor of the N64.
Ah, okay, cool.
And then LucasArts, for it is no longer Lucasfilm Games at this point, I'm fairly sure.
Yeah.
You said that the original that this time was the end of the original LucasArts output, but Carl, there was a breaking point way before that, when they were doing stuff like the Eidolon and Ballbuster.
Of course.
This is really the end of the second phase.
Well, what I meant by original was that it wasn't based on the Star Wars licenses. Original as in they created their own IP.
Yeah, it's not strictly the end of that, but,
Yeah, but close enough. I mean, we're not going to get a lot of new IP out of LucasArts from this point forward. I mean,
just Grim Fandango.
Grim Fandango and Full Throttle. But those are the two that are still coming. But, after that, we're going to get another Monkey Island or two, but...
Day of the Tentacle.
Day of the Tentacle is already out at this point, yeah. And Yoda Stories is in our future.
Yoda Stories. On a completely different note, you and Alex went into a discussion about filter bubbles. And I have to say, and you should put this in the show notes,
I will.
The filter bubble is not scientifically supported. There have been studies on this. There's different things in regards to how the internet kind of, is the way that it is. But the filter bubble is actually, it's basically, most evidence points to the opposite. That people are being exposed to things of all types, but they are focusing on things which, they disapprove of, rather than things that they approve of.
So you're saying that the filter bubble isn't people filtering out what they don't want, but instead it's
not algorithms filtering out what they don't want.
Okay.
Which is kind of what the hypothesis is that you're only seeing things that approve to your worldview. And that is not scientifically supported.
Okay. My YouTube feed would disagree with you slightly on that, but it would be interesting to see the methodologies of what they're or how they're measuring.
Well, I've sent you a link where there's scientific papers
I know,
things.
and I looked through it a little bit. But I haven't had a chance to go through the whole thing. It is kind of a big one.
But yeah, you can indulge on your own time. And one more thing, also not related to video games. You mentioned that there was a stock that got covered on television, and then it went real high up. I forget what the entire context of this was. Very interesting how CNBC, right? That covers the stock?
It was CNBC, yeah.
So the Internet History Podcast, which is a completed podcast that you can still find out there. It's a guy who was an early tech entrepreneur talking about the commercial internet, not really the social forces of the internet or anything like that. Really looking at stuff like the big IPOs and the big companies that kind of rule the internet nowadays. It is quite an interesting podcast, and he has an entire episode dedicated to how CNBC helped push the bubble. The internet bubble. And I would definitely suggest checking out the Internet History Podcast if that's a subject that interests you.
I will definitely grab that because that sounds fascinating, because as someone who was in business school during the bubble and actually had an entire profile set up on my Windows machine and bought a TV tuner card so I could have CNBC running in a window in one corner of the screen. Yes, I definitely remember it, and I know in retrospect just how absolutely idiotic most of the opinions of those people were. Why quite a few of them are now on Fox News? Coincidence? I don't know. But yeah, it's going to definitely be a topic that's going to be with us for a few more years, at least until the internet bubble bursts.
Yeah, and now it's become a staple of every coffee house that you go into and whatnot. And I just think it's interesting the way that he frames it, and how it kind of became a cultural phenomenon when it was really a niche thing before that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, buying and selling stocks until you could do it online was so expensive that the idea of an average person being a day trader was impossible. So, okay. And what's the next thing I got wrong?
Probably a lot, but we're going to stop there for now for November of 1993.
Oh, come on. Give me the win. That's not a big list considering that it was a 3-hour episode. I feel
Carl,
good.
Carl, if we inflate your ego too much, then the entire podcast might float away and then come down like the Hindenburg.
Well, at least that when people remember it, right?
There we go. All right, so that'll be it for this month, and we will see you in the final months of 1973, 1983, and 1993 coming up.
Ethan, as always, thank you for your service.
Bye!
Well, we got off pretty light there. I really should check out the Internet History Podcast sometime. I've heard great things about it from multiple sources. It's just when you work from home, I don't listen to as many podcasts as I used to.
That's very true. I notice it as well, that they start backlogging on my phone the moment I don't have to go to work. I mean, I'm between semesters right now. And yeah, I'm just not walking back and forth between classrooms and the like. And suddenly I've got I listen to the daily podcast, The Indicator, the NPR podcast, The Indicator. I've got like 12 episodes backlog suddenly. It's like, crap. So yeah, no, I totally get it. And yeah, so links to that is in all the links to everything we talk about, either in the 7 Minutes in Heaven segment, Department of Corrections, or the Time Jump, always in the show notes, people. If you're listening to this on YouTube doesn't give me enough characters in the description for all the notes. Just click on the link to the Patreon. All the normal Time Jump episodes are open to everybody, even though they're on Patreon, and there you'll be able to find the full list of links. So yes, if you want to read up more on anything that we're talking about, just check the notes. And if you're on YouTube, please go and check them out on the Patreon page. Okay? Sweet. Now, with that being said, I think it's time to turn on the time machine and head back to December of 1993.
The best possible day. 1993.
Kid to point a gun at a television set.
Welcome to December of 1993. Alex, what's our first story?
Capcom sues Data East.
Street Fighter II maker Capcom has filed suit against Data East over their game Fighter's History, which they claim is just a bit too much like Street Fighter. Capcom has filed suit in both the US and Japan, with Capcom chairman Kenzo Tsujimoto calling Data East's game a quote-unquote counterfeit. The Japanese suit asked for $62 million in damages, while the U.S. suit did not state a figure. Data East countered by saying that all martial arts games have their origin in Data East's own Karate Champ, and, according to Data East president Tetsuo Fukuda, quote, Capcom has brought the current charges simply in order to monopolize the market, end quote.
I always love this lawsuit because, way back in the day, there was this little lawsuit called Data East versus Epics, when Data East got all hot and bothered about international karate and how it was so similar to Karate Champ. And here's Data East now ripping off Street Fighter. Now, to their credit, they're not trying to suddenly claim the copies are okay. They're just trying to claim they can do whatever they want because they made a karate game once, almost 10 years ago. But still, the delicious, delicious irony.
And if memory serves me right, one of the leads on Fighter's History was also lead on the original Street Fighter, wasn't he?
I don't know. I mean, the main guy from Street Fighter, Nishiyama, went to SNK, and he did Fatal Fury.
He went.
So that may be what you're thinking.
That's where I am confused. Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, just this is settled law. Two guys fighting, you can't. You know. Now, throwing fireballs at each other. It's been done to death in fighting games. Yar Kung Fu from Konami kind of already done it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
a
just
lot of ER Kung Fu in especially the original Street Fighter.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I'm sorry, but they don't have a leg to stand on. It's going to get thrown out of court, but it's fun, as a throwback since we've covered. In a few years back, we already covered the results of the case against Epix. And it's kind of funny because, it was Epix re-releasing a game that had already been released in Europe. It's weird.
Indeed. And speaking of Capcom's continuing attempts to monopolize the market, Tournament Battle brings networking to arcades.
Capcom's never-ending lust for Street Fighter II variants continues with Super Street Fighter II: The Tournament Battle, a modified version of the recently released Super Street Fighter II that allows for 4 cabinets to be linked together for a multi-tier elimination tournament, with winners in each round being funneled from machine to machine until the final 2 contestants face off on a single cabinet.
Not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea. I don't know how practical it is to actually have that many machines running this very specific version. Yeah, I just don't see this being a long-term viable option in an arcade, but it is kind of a cool thing for the ultra-hardcore players.
Absolutely, but not quite as successful as a similar setup will be for Sega for a little game called Daytona USA, just a little bit down the line.
Daytona has already been previewed at shows, has not been reviewed yet, but there are pictures already this month, not of Daytona, but there's another Sega game before that, an F1 racer, that was doing similar things.
Virtua Racer? Or
no, I think it was either Virtua Racer or there was another game in between that may have been sprite-based. I can't remember. But yeah, networking these things is getting very, very popular right about now.
And, of course, networking so many cabinets together all the time, especially in space-conscious Japan, could be a problem for your local neighborhood game center. So it's no surprise that the Japanese mix video game and parks shows.
The JAMA show, the big coin-op game show in Japan, was combined this year with Japan's Parks show to create a mega expo, which, according to coin-op trade magazine Replay, reflects the growing trend toward themed entertainment venues.
That's right. This is right in the heart of the era when especially Sega and Namco are really trying to push this idea of the video game / simulator-driven theme park, with elaborate cabinets, virtual reality machines, motion simulation machines, providing a new form of video game entertainment.
Well, definitely. And given the fact that the game systems at home, the 16-bit systems, can reproduce your standard sprite-based games like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat without much problem, and the next generation's only a year away, you've got to stand out of the crowd. You've got to go big or go home. And this is a real discussion in all the magazines. We've talked about this over the last couple of years again and again, but the letters pages in the coin-op trade magazines are all about, how the hell am I supposed to be paying for this super expensive thing? I can't put that in a 7-Eleven. Oh, wait, 7-Eleven's not taking my games anymore.
Yeah, spoiler alert, you're not supposed to put it in there. Get a real job and let the megaplexes take over.
Well, and for anybody who wants a better insight on this, check out my interviews with the co-founder and general manager of Seattle Funplex. We talked extensively in those interviews about how they interacted as a venue owner with the operators, the guys who actually own the machines, how they interacted with them, how they would request different things, and how they tried to balance those needs out. So And that's exactly what's happening here. It's this move to something that you can't get in the home.
Exactly. And continuing in that vein, Namco teams up with Magic Edge.
The race to bring high-end 3D graphics to the arcades is on in earnest, as Namco has signed a multi-million-dollar deal that sees Namco make an equity investment into simulator maker Magic Edge that will see Namco get their products for use in Namco's themed entertainment centers. The Hornet 1 cabinet, a closed motorized system that acts as a flight simulator, uses textured 3D graphics and complex motion controls to give players a next-generation feel. The systems are complex, though, and, according to the website System 16, came with a $100,000 a year service contract.
Yep, but as we just said, this was basically the dilemma that Coin-Op was facing at this moment. Do we go up to a level of simulation that literally cannot be done in the home, and make it so expensive that only the biggest, most elaborate facilities can do anything with it? Or do we just kind of fade away as the home takes over everything? The answer is, yes, we'll do both. But this was the attempt, because there was a hope. Obviously theme parks are very popular, and simulator style rides like, say, Star Tours at Disney down in Disney World, were very popular. There were some Vegas simulators that were very popular. There was a hope that this could maybe capture the mainstream in a way that even the most successful of coin-operated video games, outside of, say, maybe Pac-Man way back in 1980, never really did. So it wasn't, the hope was not that they would just be pricing themselves out of the market. The hope is that their market would actually expand out of these products.
Well, definitely. But what these products also do, and we saw this with home ports of G-Lock, the game software that was originally shipped with the R360 arcade cabinet. Yeah, it works in the arcade, but you don't have that secondary income of the home port because the game doesn't work without all that extra mechanics to make it fun. And so you're putting a lot of R&D into a product that is only going to have that single use. It would be like, we're going to make a $200 million movie and we're only ever going to show it in movie theaters. We're never going to sell rights to television. We're never going to sell it on streaming or any other source.
Right.
That's a hell of a gamble on that one-time cost, especially with moving parts that wear out and require constant maintenance, which, let's face it, a Mortal Kombat PCB board doesn't need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's gonna go nowhere, and yes, apparently the Hornet 1 also had the problem that it never quite reacted as quickly as the graphics did on the screen, so you were always slightly delayed, according to some of the reviews I read. So,
yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Turning to the business of Coin-Op now, WMS suspected of stock market shenanigans.
Yes, WMS Industries, parent company of brands such as Midway and Bally Pinball, has come under scrutiny for purchasing a 2.5% stake in media company Viacom. This, according to the New York Times, was the company's first equity investment in recent memory and came at a crucial moment during Viacom's takeover bid of movie studio Paramount, a mostly stock bid. According to an analyst, the purchase of stock was critical to maintaining Viacom's share price and making sure that Viacom's bid beat QVC's. Why is this shenanigans? Well, Sumner Redstone, owner of Viacom parent company Amusement International, is also the single largest shareholder of WMS at 24.9% of the stock. WMS chair Luis Nicastro denies any
sorry, he's American, so it's Louis.
Louis, okay.
Yeah.
WMS chair Louis Nicastro denies any contact with Redstone or Amusement International, and Redstone did not have a seat on WMS's board.
Yeah, that was a typo as well.
No
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously don't want to say anything here potentially defamatory, but let's just say that Louis Nicastro, throughout his business career, starting with the 60s, was involved in many deals and spinouts and stock swaps that reporters of the time thought were highly suspicious. So while I can't definitively say there is a fire for legal reasons, there sure as heck is a lot of smoke, Carl. A whole lot of smoke.
Oh, yes. And this one, I mean, it doesn't really impact the video game industry as a whole, but I thought that it was a very interesting insight into the cross-media investments that many big players in traditional media had already made at this point. And it also just shows this battle for IP, because that's really what Paramount was all about, was getting that IP at this point, getting the movie distribution, and so being able to play or use WMS as a vehicle for boosting the stock and how these companies are buying each other through stocks is very interesting. If you want more information on the battle over Paramount, put a link in the show notes also to the podcast Business Wars. They did a whole series on this that I highly recommend. Very entertaining and very interesting, the whole back and forth. This WMS thing does not show up there, but like I said, it showed up when I was researching stories this month, and I thought, since Alex loves his business shenanigans, this
corporate
was right
shenanigans.
up your alley. Corporate
shenanigans.
Yes.
Is the legal term of art.
Yes, you're right. Corporate shenanigans. It's the technical term. So I thought for you, Alex, this would be something you could sink your teeth into.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Moving on then to some personnel news. Al Stone defects to Sega.
One of the OG Nintendo of America staffers, Al Stone, has jumped ship to Sega Enterprises USA as Executive Vice President of the Amusement Operations Division.
Yeah, of course, by this time, Nintendo has gotten themselves well and truly out of coin-op. And unlike his former partner, Ron Judy, who jumped into Nintendo's international business, Al Stone was really a coin-op guy through and through. So very few people ever leave Nintendo, but this is definitely a case of Nintendo no longer has a home for me. And, of course, Tom Pettit is about to transfer out of Sega Enterprises USA, which will give Al Stone a chance to become the president in not too much longer, and he will stay with the company for just over a decade, or roughly a decade, I should say, until the company is bought out by Sammy and all of the coin-op staff at Sega Enterprises USA, all the high-level management resigns because, as Hal Ivey put it to me once in an interview, who was also there, Sammy buying Sega felt a little bit like when Kmart bought Sears.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Yeah, and I mean, it's not the only major defection from Nintendo to Sega that we've seen in recently, and that other defector is going to show up later today. So yes, it is interesting just to see. And of course, we talked last month about how, Nintendo is planning at least 2 new coin-op releases using their Project Reality hardware. But yeah, you're right. They're not a coin-op company anymore. We've talked about it a year ago, and that is just the end of that era.
Absolutely. But Al Stone isn't the only exciting news out of Sega this month, as Sega set for world domination.
According to a recent Wired article, Sega is set to take over the whole world of entertainment with up to 100 elaborate $10 to $50 million apiece virtual land family entertainment centers, the prototype of which is their recently launched center at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, with their Redwood City facilities prepping for movie-style productions and cutting-edge tech. This combined with their planned Sega Channel online distribution service that will launch in March 1994, the upcoming Sega Saturn, and their now dominant position in the 16-bit wars. How could they be stopped?
For the answer to that question, go look at the Dreams of Sega episode of They Create Worlds to see exactly how they can be stopped. No. But
no, seriously, that was a great episode that really did encapsulate this moment and what's going on at Sega at this moment.
Yeah, but there was a lot of buzz. I mean, not just in Wired, but there was a big New York Times piece at some point in 1993 as well. I can't remember if it made it into the show or not.
It here on
I
the
couldn't
show,
remember. Yeah, I thought we probably did. But this was a period when interactive entertainment and virtual reality and multimedia and all of this stuff was in the news. It felt like to a lot of observers that there was truly a new age of technological entertainment coming, and Sega was the one making the big bets. I mean, they weren't the most successful in the business. They weren't the most profitable in the business, but Nakayama truly did commit himself in this period to becoming what the New York Times referred to as the Walt Disney of the video game era.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the CD-ROM drive out there. They've got, the big arcade games that you could show off and point to going, 3D, look, Virtua Fighter. They're 3D polygons. They've been showing off their VR headset, which, according to one commentator this month in a magazine, was, yeah, they better do something with this, because if they launch it the way it is right now, this is going to be a dud. And they're correct. And we'll get to another story about a VR helmet this month. But the whole idea that they are the one coming up aces, it just feels right for many reasons. And one of them is
Sonic tops Q survey.
Sonic has beaten out Mario for the top spot in name recognition and marketability among boys aged 6 to 11, according to the influential Q survey. Nothing to do with the other Q that we know nowadays. The results came from
the delightful character played by John Delancey on Star Trek.
I wish that's really what I was able to think of when I think of Q nowadays. The world would be such a nicer place. So, yes. The results came from a study that preceded the premiere of Sonic's Saturday morning cartoon show. So, about to get an even bigger boost right there.
Yes, indeed. Now, of course, it's easy. It can be easy to read too much into that. Now, obviously, Sonic was popular, but the Q survey is... it's at least yearly. Do they do it more often? Do they do it monthly?
I think it's only yearly.
I honestly don't know.
Yearly.
Yeah, it's yearly, and this one is happening in the middle of 1993. Super Mario World and the attendant and Super Mario Brothers 3 and the attendant tie-in cartoons, etc., are well in the rearview mirror. Super Mario 64 is nowhere to be seen yet, and kids are not necessarily known for living too far out of the current moment. So there isn't really a lot of Mario attention for Sonic at this specific juncture, is the point that I'm making. Sonic's the one that has games coming out, comic books coming out, cartoons coming out, and Mario really isn't. So while it does show how successful Sega has been and Sonic has been with these demographics, it's not quite the solid KO that I'm sure Sega would like to market it as.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the fact that Sonic has been coming out yearly for almost 3 years at this point is a major factor in this. And you're right. I mean, Nintendo has Mario Kart and Mario World. There's no Yoshi spin-off games on here yet. Tetris Attacks hasn't come out yet. I mean, it almost seems like that Mario universe of characters hasn't really jumped over to any other games at this point. But then again, Mario Kart was, for practical intents and purposes, the beginning of that trend of, or reinvigorating of that trend of using Mario for everything, and the true beginning of the trend of using the other Mario characters in other games. In a side note to all this, in a sign of just how powerful the Sonic brand has become, an article critiquing the 3DO launch lineup, and in particular the pack entitled Crash and Burn by Ed Dill and Arnie Katz, is titled 3DO Software, Does Anyone See a Sonic in Here? A title that would have definitely referred to Mario just a year or two earlier.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I imagine that it should come as no surprise then if Arnie Katz is using that language, that one of his journalistic partners, one Bill Kunkel, calls it for Sega.
Although I'm not sure, is it? Do they already have the Sega?
That was a 93 thing.
Campaign? Yeah, so I think it's not Sega, it's Sega.
Yes.
That he was going for, but yeah. So, games journalist OG Bill Kunkel has written a great editorial piece in this month's Electronic Games about the heated 16-bit war between Sega and Nintendo, concluding that, despite Sega VR being dead on arrival, the very slow birth of quality software for the Sega CD, and new consoles on the horizon, Sega is going to win the Christmas battle. He justifies this with Sega's efforts to concentrate on a broader audience, the 2-year head start that allowed developers to figure out the strengths of the Genesis's hardware, aka speed, and the fact that Nintendo simply hasn't been on the cutting edge of tech, having dropped the ball on networking efforts and not having a foothold in the high-tech coin-op arena. The next-gen Sega system will be out way before Project Reality. He does warn, though, that in a never-ending battle, victory is always just temporary.
Prophetic words there, because, of course, everything that Kunkel says here is true. What it doesn't capture, of course, and what we know now, is the relative financial strength of Sega and Nintendo, and just how much precious treasure that Sega could ill afford it took to keep winning Christmas year over year over year in the United States.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it also very much forgets the importance of the Japanese market. Mm-hmm. And it also just the cash cow that is the Game Boy.
Yes.
Just the amount of money that's generating and the amount of mind share that it must be giving Nintendo with kids. Because, you know, Game Boy games are cheaper to buy. You take them with you. You're playing that Game Boy and there's no Sega, there's no Sonic showing up on that Game Boy. Oh, can you imagine trying to play Sonic on an OG Game Boy? Blur was bad enough,
yes.
But holy crap and a half.
It would just be one giant motion blur streak across the entire screen. That would
it would be fun. It would be fun. Yeah.
But as there are winners in a war, there also have to be losers. And it seems 3DO launch a dud.
Apparently, despite Trip Hawkins' proclamations about having had a ton of time to prepare the launch of the 3DO, no software other than Crash and Burn, the pack-in title, was available on launch. By early November, only 2 putt-putt adventure games, a bird guidebook, and Mad Dog McCree were available in the Chicago area. Maybe Madden, to be launched in late November, will turn the tide for the system. No doubt the lack of fixed hardware specs until the very last minute and a lack of development systems haven't helped.
Imagine that, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about this last month or the month before, how Trip Hawkins was poo-pooing Atari and the Jaguars, like, well, we've already had this much time to get all our developers lined up. They are just starting now. They'll never be able to amount to anything. Yeah, and there's lots of stories, anecdotal, of course, of developers talking about how their development systems for the 3DO are basically just doorstops gathering dust, and yeah, it doesn't look good.
Nope. But meanwhile, don't worry, the next generation isn't dead yet because Atari announces Jaguar devs.
Atari has finally announced their initial developers list for the Jaguar, and boy, it's a who's who of, well, who's. So we've got Anco, Dimensions Technologies, Eurosoft, High Voltage, Chrysalis, Loriciel, Maxis, Microids, Midnight, Ocean, Rebellion, Retour 2048, Silmarillus, Titus, Tiertex, always a great one to have on your side, Trimark, and US Gold. And no titles.
You skipped right over Trade West. You skipped right over Trade West in your list.
I'm sorry, Trade West. Yes, Trade West is in there. So if we're lucky, we'll get some Super Off-Road. and no titles were listed for these devs, but Telegames is preparing Ultimate Brain Games and European Soccer Challenge, and Beyond Games will release Battle Wheels.
Wow, that is a group right there.
Yeah, a coalition of the willing, anybody?
A coalition of European companies that were never very successful at breaking into console, but the Atari ST was popular over here, so that's a good sign, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially Loriciel. I mean, Maxis is on board, but they never release anything for the system.
No.
I mean, yeah, this is not good.
And yeah, no, I mean, most of these companies are also RANs, and the ones that aren't, there's some good reasons for us. Maxis is in the process of trying to become a big, mature public company, so, which, spoiler alert, in 1995, we will end is not going very well for them. And so I think they're just on board because they have no console presence anywhere, and they're just trying to up their product releases to try to become a bigger company. There are the closest things to console titans, and I use that term very loosely, on this list are Trade West and Ocean. But Ocean, again, is just one of the, we'll flood the market and see what happens kind of companies, rather than taking a targeted strategy to their releases. And Trade West is a company that has been almost entirely dependent on licenses, and I think is starting to find itself squeezed out by the bigger companies as well, and so is entering into a period of desperation.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Telegames was very big on links, as was Beyond Games. Battle Wheels is a very impressive links car combat game. It's not going to be released for the Jaguar. No, I think that one actually does get a release on the Jaguar. I'd have to look it up again. It doesn't really matter. Battle Wheels doesn't get a release on the Jaguar, as does European Soccer Challenge, which was basically isometric soccer game, also doesn't get released. It's not going to go well. They're going to bring over some European computer games like Baldies and Syndicate and Theme Park, but that's
at least they'll
tech on your 64-bit console.
At least they'll always have Rebellion, and it's Alien versus Predator.
yeah, that's pretty much all they're gonna have. Well, they're gonna get a very good version of Doom. Let's not undersell Doom. If your options were playing it on a Jaguar or Super Nintendo, you were gonna want to play that Jaguar.
I mean, I think my bathroom scale does a pretty good version of Doom at this point.
That's 30 years later. My God, man, 30 years. You can't make that comparison. Otherwise, I'd be talking up the amazing port of Capcom vs. SNK that was released for the C64. It doesn't count, though.
But the hype does not stop with the developer announcements, because Atari also launches Jaguar ad campaign.
A 2-page ad showing a Jaguar jumping at Sonic and Mario is promoting Atari's Jaguar, with screenshots of 2 available games and 3 to come.
I'm sure that's going to turn the tide.
Oh, yeah, especially
I need to take a look at this real fast here.
Yeah, it's the absolutely terrible mocked up image for Tiny Toon Adventures, where 3 of the characters are in a rocket. Which, that's no. Checkered Flag, which is a polygon.
Oh, Trevor McFur.
Oh, yeah. Nothing gets the blood going like that. And the images that they used actual copyrighted original images of Sonic and Mario, but it's the Mario Bakery.
Yeah, Yoshi's Cookie.
Yeah, and some image of Sonic running it. It makes no sense. This was
also that Jaguar has clearly overshot its target and is going to miss, and a better metaphor for what is about to happen could not be present here. Yes, no. Indeed. But even though these systems like the 3DO and the Jaguar are kind of floundering around, that doesn't mean that they aren't having some impacts on the market. And as a matter of fact, the bit hype forces Sega's hand.
With both Atari and Nintendo hyping 64-bit next-gen consoles, Sega has seen their hand forced and have announced that the upcoming Sega Saturn will get a 64-bit video chip added to its configuration to keep from being seen as, quote, behind, end quote, the times. Yeah, so this is where the very, very flexible hardware configuration of the soon-to-be-released Sega Saturn begins.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, by this point, I think by this point they've already made the decision to add the second processor to the system, which was a direct response to the PlayStation. And now it's a bit unclear, as all of the Sega development stuff is a bit unclear, whether they actually added the second video chip at this time or just decided that it was a good idea to start hyping the extra video chip at this time, and EGM got confused. But whatever the reason, they are trying to portray their complicated and clunky multi-processor system as an asset in this market, not a burden. And good luck with that.
Well, and this is also why one of the reasons I want to include that Bill Kunkel thing, because he highlighted the fact that Sega had 2 years on Nintendo, which gave them, the developers, time to come to grips with the hardware and so forth. I can really imagine that inside Sega, somebody was doing that same calculus. We're going to have some extra time to work it out, even if they come up with something better than what we have. Because let's face it, the Super NES could do all the cool Mode 7 and stuff. Even if they have that advantage, we'll have time to work out the kinks. They'll still be on first generation software. We'll have the advantage. And obviously Sony coming into this has just torpedoed any chance of that working. And here's a quick note on that. So Sony's plans to launch a 32-bit console, which we reported on last month, has led to further statements by Sony, including their response concerning the power of the system in light of both Nintendo and Sega's 64-bit announcements, that PlayStation will, quote, go beyond the 64-bit class systems under development by Nintendo and Sega, end quote, and that it will be comparable to workstations. Electronic Gaming Monthly also reports that several 3DO developers who can't officially comment because of NDAs have been courted by Sony and are planning on bringing their 3DO games to the PlayStation, which is something that we then definitely see happen.
Oh, yes. And we get what I think Trip Hawkins would refer to as the great betrayal when Electronic Arts decides to basically shift their focus to the PlayStation away from the 3DO.
Shockwave Assault, all those little lessons learned in FIFA and Madden. Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah, and this was a very confusing time. We're seeing it all over the place. In both coin-op and console. It's a very confusing time where new technologies are coming fast and furious. The hype for new technologies is coming even faster. And everyone is a bit confused about what comes next, except for Sony. Now, I'm not saying that Sony was technically had any better knowledge than anyone else, but it feels like Sony is the one company that had the courage of their convictions to decide what was coming next, regardless of what else was going on, and cut through the noise. And I think all of these other companies are having a real problem doing it.
I agree with you, and I would propose the following explanation, and that is that Sony doesn't have a legacy in 2D. Yes. Everybody else is like, well, what do we do with the franchises we've already established? What do we do with all the tools, all the training, all the staff that we have that does 2D? What do we do with Sonic? Can we take Sonic into 3D? As we've later on see with the Sega Saturn, there is no proper Sonic game on the system because they can never really crack the code of how do we do Sonic in 3D. And Sony doesn't have that problem. They're coming in with no legacy properties. They can be like, here are our properties: Wipeout, Destruction Derby. All when they let Psygnosis loose to create those next gen properties, they get to come at it completely fresh. Had they tried to do Shadow of the Beast in 3D, that would have been problematic. But they can tailor it. They don't have to have the characters. They don't have to have the personalities. Okay, they got the Dominatrix in Toshinden, but that's also a third-party development. It's not an internal thing. So yeah, it's then surviving off of legacy or figuring out how to reinvent your legacy. That takes a while.
Exactly. But not to leave Nintendo out of all of this news, we now turn to the Kyoto company as Nintendo announces Project Reality chip makers.
Gearing up for their September 1995 launch in both Japan and the US, Nintendo has announced that 3 companies, NEC, Toshiba, and Sharp, will provide the chips for their new risk-based system. And analysts, according to the Nikkei Weekly, predict that this will create a demand of 8 million RISC processors a year worth $430 million.
Yeah, the big companies are realizing this is a lucrative business. That's 3 of the big 4 right there, and the other of the big 4, Hitachi, is completely 100% in bed with Sega. They are all clamoring to get in on this next generation because the video game industry is starting to look like a really, really lucrative place for making chips. I mean, obviously, there have always been chips in these games, but now that GPUs are becoming more important, now that massive amounts of RAM are becoming more important, video RAM's becoming more important, consoles are seen as a gold mine, I think, as a mainstream computing device that needs a lot of fancy hardware.
Oh, definitely. And let's not forget, once you've become the developer or the supplier of very specific chips, you basically make the same chip for 5 years because you're not upgrading the system. Mm-hmm. You're not constantly having to create a new iteration like you have to with PC hardware where, what you made 6 months ago, I don't care about it anymore. No retooling for 5 years except maybe to make a cost-reduced version after 2. That is a lucrative business.
Absolutely. Good gig if you can get it. And the biggest companies want it now, that's for sure. When Nintendo did the NES, they had a hard time finding a company that was willing to supply to them. And now I think all of these chip makers are banging down the doors of the Japanese console makers to try to get in on the ground floor. So a big power shift in just a decade right there.
Yeah. Very big. But some things won't change.
And some things will not, as Nintendo disses CDs.
While not officially announced, Edge magazine reports that sources close to Nintendo have said that the decision to make the Project Reality console, Nintendo's 64-bit follow-up to the Super NES, a cartridge-based system as opposed to CD-ROM-based, has already been made. This follows the official announcement of the project, which we talked about last month, which curiously did not mention which data storage format the system would use, but also carefully omitted the term CD. The main reason seems to be Nintendo's desire to keep control over software releases for the system and maintain high per-unit production costs, a model that has served them well and made them very wealthy. According to one prominent publisher Edge spoke to, they can argue, quote, they can argue till they're blue in the face, but they cannot tell me one single advantage that cartridges have over CDs. The only reason they're sticking to carts is to follow the pattern that's made them their fortunes, end quote.
Well, and I realize that a little hyperbole is being used, but I've got 2 words for you, Mr. Anonymous Prominent Publisher: load times. Now, I'm not saying load times is a reason to stick with cartridges, but you, sir, said you cannot tell me one single advantage. And I can, sir, name you one single advantage.
Well, but let's be fair. If this is a system that's coming out in 2 years, yes, there's the Sega CD is a single speed. The Amiga CD32 is already a dual speed player. Within 2 years, we're going to have quad speeds. It's not that big of a problem by then.
Well, I would disagree. By then, people had forgotten how fast their games used to load. Look, I'm not making an argument that Nintendo made the right choice by switching to cartridge. I am just very pithily telling Mr. Prominent Publisher that I can think of one.
There is one reason, yes.
There are many disadvantages. Cost, storage capacity, reorder times, etc. There are a million disadvantages, but there is one advantage, sir.
This is true. But the load times is... and the fact that you can get away with a lot less RAM on that motherboard.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because you can swap stuff in and out really, really fast from a cartridge.
Exactly, yeah. But this really was primarily a means of maintaining the level of control Nintendo was accustomed to. not just from their publishing community, but they were also very concerned about piracy, which any Bleem user can tell you was not exactly a wrong thing to be a little bit concerned about. Shout out to Bleem for those who know.
Yes, I was a Bleem user. But then,
well, I knew notorious Argentine software pirate Carl Curris would be, yes.
I did not use Bleem to pirate software. I used Bleem purely to be able to play PlayStation games without having to buy an extra television set and a console. I was perfectly okay with supporting the software as long as I didn't have to buy an extra piece of hardware. But that's another issue entirely. But yes, the whole problem here is they're going to shoot themselves in the foot with this nonsense.
Yeah.
But, oh well. It's
Pretty
not like
much.
they need Squaresoft. Come on.
No, I mean, Japanese RPGs have never been popular in the West. It doesn't matter.
Or in Japan. I mean, come on. It's a niche. Nobody cares.
And of course, you saying that, the other company that they lose through this is Enix, and that is just as bad, because I always like throwing this piece of trivia out there for people who don't understand what the impact of Dragon Quest was in Japan. The best-selling PlayStation game in Japan. Not Gran Turismo. Not Tomb Raider. Not Final Fantasy VII. Not Resident Evil.
Pepsi
Pepsi Man. Dragon Quest VII. Best-selling PlayStation 1 game in Japan.
That's insane. But it makes perfect sense. The series has that level of following, and they're not going to limit themselves to, we have a 20 meg cart? Ooh! Or whatever the cartridge sizes would have been at that point, and it's going to cost $200 to make it? Yay! Neo Geo! Neo Geo!
Yeah. But turning away from hardware to the political scene in the United States, one Lieberman attacks video game violence.
In a U.S. Senate hearing on video game violence on December 7th, which would go on to force the creation of the modern North American games rating system, but wasn't important enough to be reported on in the New York Times at the time, senators heard from and questioned researchers, activists, a housewife, and industry executives about how to protect the children. And we did a 3-hour commentary on that hearing that you can watch on YouTube.
Yes, I think we can leave this headline there for the most part, because we did cover this. And, of course, we've been covering the ramp up to it. The main event happens. It does not disappoint if you are a fan of just absolutely chaotic sniping between panelists and a complete lack of understanding of technology by old senators who repeatedly try to emphasize to the poor president of the AMOA that Mortal Kombat is something that could come, that their people could sell, that their members could sell in the home, even though they represent coin-op companies.
Yeah, it's it beginning, middle, and end of it is, it's a bit of a shit show. It was very fun to discover that the New York Times mentions it in passing a week later in a story that's coming up here in a little bit. But other than that, it goes completely unremarked at the time in the mainstream press, as far as I can tell. There's probably outlets that did cover it, but
it had to have been covered somewhere, because myself and my parents knew it was happening. Maybe the TV news covered it more, in all seriousness. It's possible television news, cable news covered it more than the newspapers did. because we were aware of it, and we weren't aware of it because Nintendo Power said anything about it, because of course they didn't. So it was out there somewhere.
I think it's the story after the next one that triggers everybody realizing that it happened.
Fair.
Because that's the thing that's going to get the story. But yeah.
Gotcha. But meanwhile, we turn our attention to one of the lesser lights of that video game violence hearing, as Lethal Enforcers is on Genesis and may be coming to SNES.
A 2-page ad for Konami's light gun shooter Lethal Enforcers tells kids that they can play this cops and robbers shootout with digitized graphics on their Genesis and, quote, a Super NES game may be released. Please check with Konami for availability, end quote. This, of course, appearing the same month that Howard Lincoln is defending Nintendo's position about violent games not appearing on their systems. And, of course, the Super NES port will appear in January 1994.
There may have been some slight discussion about this at a certain hearing in December, though Lethal Enforcers was definitely a bit player compared to Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, and was mostly there just so Lieberman could wave a toy gun around and say, violence!
A powder blue toy gun. Let's not forget that, because it just looks so manly when he's holding up the powder blue toy gun. But the fact that Howard Lincoln was like, we don't have anything like that. And of course it gives us my favorite moment of the whole hearing when the former Nintendo executive now at Sega pulls out the, what was it called again? The Eliminator? No, what was the
No. The Super...
the Super Scope.
No, the Nintendo's was the Super Scope.
Yeah.
The Menacer was at Sega.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good but yeah, the Super Scope bazooka thing, it's like, this is what Nintendo's selling. So yeah,
that's right.
I just saw that ad with that little add-on at the bottom, and I was like, oh yeah, you guys approve that. You approve that. So, Howard Lincoln, shame on you. And I'm not just saying that because he refuses to grant me an interview. Shame on you.
Well, Howard Lincoln did grant me an.
I know.
It's not a contest.
Rub it in.
It's not a contest. We're all historians in this together.
Yeah.
But turning to some of the actual real ramifications of this hearing, Toys R Us stopped selling Night Trap.
Lightning Rod FMV game Night Trap has been pulled from North American Toys R Us stores a week after the Senate hearings. Tom Zito, head of Digital Pictures, makers of the game, said he was disappointed by the move because, quote, while it is certainly not an appropriate game for an 8-year-old, Night Trap is actually very benign and is designed as a parody of a vampire movie, end quote. He also felt the 20 to 30 second clip shown at the hearings was not representative of the game's over 100 minutes of footage, and the game was unfairly pilloried.
Now, of course, reading between the lines here, Night Trap was a bad game.
Yeah.
I imagine it wasn't selling very well for Toys R Us, and that this was an easy win for them to get a stupid game off their shelves and make them look responsible doing it, because this has certainly not been accompanied by a headline that says Toys R Us stopped selling Mortal Kombat.
Very true. And we have to also remember, we talked about this a month or two ago, how Toys R Us in the UK and Australia had already stopped selling Night Trap. Mm-hmm. And Night Trap, and I can't remember which article I found this in, is apparently one of the few 3DO games. It's come out on 3DO. The New York Times article actually has the cover of the 3DO version on the article. That's one of the few games on the 3DO that's actually selling right now. That's actually moving. So, yeah, you're right. It's clearly just, Toys R Us being able to take the high ground saying, see, we're doing something about it.
But wait, sir, is that Mortal Kombat I see behind this? This press conference is over.
Exactly. Because they ain't killing that cash cow anytime soon.
No.
That one's worth way, way too much. But this is also the moment when the only one of two references to the hearings in the December issues of the New York Times actually show up. Mm-hmm. And they're both in relationship. The other one's also a briefer version of this article talking about Night Trap being pulled from Toys R Us. So yeah, this is probably what you got back in the day, because it being pulled from Toys R Us makes a headline.
Could be. But while Toys R Us may not be in a hurry to take Mortal Kombat off of its shelves, MK does get cut for Japan.
Word on the street is that the Mega Drive won't be getting any Mortal Kombat action in Japan. The edited Super Famicom, Game Boy, and Game Gear titles will still be released, but the Sega console title may be too much for the Japanese market. Now, it does ultimately come out. So at this point in time, there just wasn't a release date. Mega Drive version does come out in Japan, but it doesn't make it in time for Christmas. It doesn't come out in December, but they'll get it much later and with most of the gore removed. So it is a highly edited version.
Yeah, and I wonder, and I have no idea of this, but I wonder if the reason for that is just they knew they were going to have to edit it. The Mega Drive has sold so little in Japan. Western games don't tend to do well in Japan, and this doesn't seem fully in Japan's taste. They might have been considering that maybe it's not worth the cost to edit it and release it in Japan, rather than it being for any reasons of controversy. But obviously they do decide to in the end.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I guess it's probably a big enough title at this point, or at least the hype is big enough around it. I'd love to be able to actually read some Japanese coverage of Mortal Kombat in 93. Just to see, what was the Japanese reaction to the gore factor. We know from a couple of the coin-op magazines that it was shown at Japanese trade shows, but we don't really get a sense of how well it was received and how well it sold over there.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is where somebody please start doing those machine translations of the weekly Famitsus. I would love to be able to add those to my research pile every week. But yes. Absolutely.
Continuing our look at the fallout, however, we have Nintendo kind of going all out on the warpath here. First of all, with a reiteration that Nintendo is only after kids.
Yes, Nintendo's Peter Main told Electronic Games magazine that Nintendo sees kids 8 to 14 as the backbone of the industry, and that many kids 16 and older have outgrown Nintendo, but they are confident in their stance that the Nintendo seal will continue to mean that parents feel good about their product being in homes. This is contrasted with Tom Kalinske, who sees multimedia as bringing in a larger, older audience into the games market, and that all sides can be catered to.
Yeah, I mean, and still to this day, there's a little bit of that in Nintendo. Not that they don't release adult games or mature games, or, even in this time period, don't release Mortal Kombat 2 with all of the fatalities intact, but there's always been a little bit of that mindset. I think toys are part of their DNA. I think Nintendo, being a kind of very traditional old line Japanese company, not just a toy company, but just that they're a Japanese company, is a little less comfortable rocking the boat in society, as opposed to upstarts like Sega and even Sony. There's probably a lot of psychological, financial, historical reasons for that. But even as they loosen up a bit, this is what they do. And Peter Main's not really blowing smoke here. I mean, yes, this is damage control after the hearings, but that really is the audience they go for, is that 8 to 14-year-old market. Yeah.
And it really is that question of where are people going to play? What are they going to play? It's a weird sort of tangent. There's an article this month in Computer Gaming World. It's a report from the European Computer Trade Show, the big show where new software is shown off in the UK, and the American assessment of Computer Gaming World being the patron saints of the PC master race. Reading that magazine every month is just kind of, it's I bang my head against the wall sometimes. It feels so wrong. But they're talking, the writer of it spends a big chunk of the article not talking about the new games that they saw, but what they think the difference is between an American player and the European computer player. And he assesses it as the American player wants to fall in love, have a deep, meaningful relationship with their game. And the European wants the fast, quick, exciting fling, And I'm not disagreeing with him. But his main thing that he missed was, at this point in time, consoles are basically a small fraction of the market. Means we use computers for the fast action games, for the stuff in the States you would use a console for. And
exactly
the idea that you would have people who would stay with one machine, that wouldn't graduate out of their NES and move to their PC to play strategy games when they got older, but they'd be using the same machine that they played their action games on to later play their strategy games. Their Amiga could play Great Gianna Sisters and Dune 2. That's a very different culture, and that's what Kalinske, I think, is going for. And we see it in the types of games that are coming out on the Genesis. I mean, this month, one of the possible games would have been Dune 2 on the Genesis for 7 Minutes in Heaven. That's the kind of shift that I think Kalinske sees. Interactive entertainment for everybody, regardless of the age. And Nintendo still has that mindset.
Absolutely. And, I was a teenager in these years and I stuck with Nintendo, but basically I had Nintendo for my Japanese RPGs, my occasional Zelda and Mario game, and my Street Fighters. And I did everything else on the PC, which is why, I didn't feel I needed Sega in my life, but Nintendo was also not meeting my needs. As a teenager, I had to augment that system with a lot of stuff on PC.
So what you're saying is you had to get a piece on the side in order to be able to make, to fulfill your needs, especially as a growing boy.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Carly.
Okay, cool. Just needed to make sure I got that clear.
Getting back, however... Look, I'm the transition guy. I can make this conversation go away. Back, however, to our look at Nintendo's response to the hearings, we see the other part of their strategy as Nintendo releases game content guidelines.
To help defend against the ever louder blare of media attention around video game violence, Nintendo has released a brochure for parents called, quote, Parents' Guide to Video Game Play. And the media has gotten Nintendo's internal game content guidelines to help everyone understand how Nintendo is helping protect our children. The children. From bare boobies, quote, graphic illustrations of death, end quote, and, quote, excessive violence, end quote, such as body dismemberment or displays of drugs, cigarettes, or alcohol.
All of the horrors of the modern world right there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Still allowed to shoot people with a gun in Contra, apparently. But
well, aliens in Contra.
Not in the first level. In the first level, you're still killing the regular people until you get to the base.
I know they look like football players, but it's all aliens. No, but yeah, it's that. Nintendo is only responding to the culture that they're in. I mean, this isn't Nintendo's culture. I mean, yes, they don't want to make a controversy. They want parents to be comfortable. I think that's ingrained in Nintendo's culture, but that's America for you. As South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut made it very clear, it's like, put as much violence on the television as you want, but as soon as you get into the swearing and into the sex, and that's when it's a problem.
And the fart jokes. Now You've gone too far.
Exactly, and of course the religion stuff is just because religion is inherently controversial, and Nintendo's entire plan is to be uncontroversial. Like I said, I think there's probably some old conservative Japanese company kind of thing going on there. Not so much that, Yamauchi necessarily cared about, whether there was, religion or sex in games, from his own perspective, but just this idea in Eastern culture of not rocking the boat and not losing face, probably plays into this some, but they really do take this to an extreme. I mean, everyone has their content standards. People never talk about Sega's content standards, but they actually did have content standards. But it wasn't just this blanket, we want to avoid everything controversial, and that just seems to be Nintendo's whole raison d'etre in this period.
They want to be the Garfield of video games.
That's right.
And, yeah, curiously enough, I don't believe they ever had a Garfield game in the West. I think those were all on Genesis. I know they had one in Japan. Sorry, now I'm very, very curious. Garfield games on Nintendo platform.
That is a tangent worthy of They Create Worlds right there, Carl.
Yeah, dude, what can I say? I mean,
man,
as someone who has played his fair share of Garfield games over the years, at this point in time, all the Garfield games... No, okay, that doesn't count. Real Ghostbusters doesn't count as a Garfield game because it was not released as a Garfield game in the United States. No. There is no Garfield game. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
On a Nintendo platform until... Now there was a Garfield game in Japan on the Famicom in '89, but the first one is 2004, and that's a Game Boy Advance game.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, of all the properties that were super valuable in the late '80s, you think they would have done this probably because the rights were still tied up with Edge, and they were only doing home computer games. So that's probably where that comes from. But
very interesting. Meanwhile, looking beyond Nintendo to the wider video game industry response to the hearings, it appears the video game industry agrees on a rating system.
According to a report in the New York Times from December 9th, that's 2 days after the hearings, the video game industry has agreed to create a rating system. The report claims the effort is being spearheaded by industry number 2, Sega, and Nintendo is on board. Although Nintendo VP of Marketing Peter Main was skeptical, saying, quote, "If they think rating systems are going to make violence go away, they're missing the point."
Well, Peter Main, if you think rating systems are designed to make violence go away, you're missing the point.
Exactly. It's there
No
to
offense.
make the violence palatable.
Exactly. culturally acceptable violence because we put a label on it.
Exactly. You were warned ahead of time. You can't act shocked now.
That's right. Yeah, so I think the New York Times is getting a little confused here. I mean, absolutely, Sega and Nintendo are both on board at this point, I think, with the idea of having some kind of rating system because they know that this is really the only way to forestall congressional action, and anything Congress decides to impose on them will be much worse. Primarily because Congress doesn't really want to be in this business, and they use the threat of the something much worse to make the industry regulate itself. But the fact that Sega's driving this, I think they're getting confused by the fact that Sega already has a rating system. And yes, it is true, once discussions really started up, which I'm not sure, I don't think they have by the 9th, 2 days later. Once discussions really start, Sega is kind of like, well, we happen to have this rating system. And of course, Nintendo was like, no. And so that Sega system's not used. So I think the New York Times is probably getting a little confused by the fact that Sega already has a rating system and that the sides have kind of tentatively agreed that something needs to be done and are combining these two facts into something that is a little not quite accurate.
Well, yeah, and this is where I would say we need to go back to my interview with a friend of the show, Mr. Fischbach, because he does talk about, at the time, head of Acclaim, publishers of the home versions of Mortal Kombat. So he was in the eye of the storm, and he told me about how he got together with the various parties, including Nintendo and Sega. And the day of the hearing, they were already sort of working, the back channels were running on this. So it wouldn't surprise me if they've leaked 2 days later that a rating system is coming, even though there's nothing in concrete in hand. But they're definitely leaking this in order to counter program about this.
Absolutely.
And the funny thing here is, this New York Times article doesn't mention the hearings. It's 2 days later. They don't mention the hearings, just that they're going to do this, and there's some vague talk about congressional stuff going on. But the hearing itself gets no mention in this.
For some reason we're not quite sure of, the video game industry unexpectedly said maybe we should do ratings. I don't know why.
Yeah. It's yeah.
That's kind of funny. Adding to the drama around ratings, however, is that the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, threatened to sue video game makers.
Tom Kalinske has told Electronic Games magazine that in an effort to come up with a usable rating system for games, he reached out to the Motion Picture Association of America, creators of the commonly used movie ratings in the USA, for help creating a system for games, and was told that the MPAA would sue Sega or anyone who created a system similar to theirs. So, and this is part of an article about the whole issue of the controversy over violence in games and electronic games. And I just, it was a fun little anecdote, which I can totally see the MPAA threatening at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is really a bit of a short-sighted move on the part of the MPAA, I think, because this was an opportunity to really get in on the ground floor of a very lucrative new section of doing ratings. But it's also not surprising because the MPAA was basically one man. That man was named Jack Valenti. That man was born in 1921. And I'm sure he had no clue about this whole video game thing, and there weren't anyone else that had any power in that organization during the 38 years he was in charge. So,
yeah, this is clearly exactly what you're saying. I mean, had they decided to branch out, imagine what they could have done, also becoming the de facto ratings system for television. I mean, all those blended in television ratings that we got later on in the 90s and the 2000s, on television shows could have been a source of income for the MPAA, just, turning themselves into the de facto judges of age restrictions for content. But
absolutely.
Now they're just in the ghetto of theatrical releases.
Pretty much. Well, I think that is about enough hearing coverage, so let's shift to some technology here as VictorMax Stuntmaster VR headset reviewed.
We get the first real review of VictorMax's Stuntmaster VR headset this month. The $250 peripheral for either the Super NES or the Genesis provides users with 2 LCD displays and a rudimentary horizontal head tracking system through a potentiometer built into the headset that is activated by the motion of a wire attached to a stick clipped onto the wearer's shirt. All other functions in a game continue to be controlled via gamepad. The system is not going to win prizes for visual or audio quality and doesn't seem to be really useful for anything beyond first-person games like Faceball 2000 or games with forward motion like F-Zero or Outrun, but the reviewer does see it as an interesting first step toward the brave new world of VR.
VR is always just 5 years away, Carl.
Yep.
Being ready for the big time.
For the last 30 years. So this is... Have you ever seen the VictorMax?
I have not. I have heard tell of the system with the wire and the stick, but I have not actually seen a picture of this thing. I assume there's one in your magazine article here. Yeah, so I am looking at the this headset right now, and that is quite special. That little vestigial tail it has back there. Very classy.
Yeah, so the way that it worked, you had the 2 screens in front, which basically just replicate what you would see on the television set. There's no vertical motion control. So you can't look up, you can't look down. If you look up, it's basically as if the screen is just moving with you. Now, there's a little twisty thing at the top that has a wire sticking out of it. That's the potentiometer. And then you have this little stick with a clip that you clip onto your shirt. You run the wire on the stick to hold it into place. You calibrate it so it knows where the middle is. And that way, when you turn, it's basically the stick on your shirt is holding on to the wire, so it moves the potentiometer. And by moving the potentiometer, it knows that you've turned your head left or right. It's not really useful.
So, 2 questions.
Yes.
That arise immediately out of this. First question. Was their head designer MacGyver? Second question, if their head designer was MacGyver, did this also double as a small thermonuclear device?
I don't believe it was MacGyver, and it probably was held together with bubblegum. It's an interesting idea, and this is actually what the reviewer says, that the potential of the device, of showing what would be possible, and the way that it's implementing it makes sense for the hardware of the time. So let's face it, most of these 16-bit systems are not going to be doing full look around in all directions, real-time 3D worlds. You're not going to be playing Quake on a Super Nintendo. So the left-right restriction is actually something that both keeps the price reasonable and makes sense. But they're also criticizing the sound sucks, the screen resolution obviously is not great. I found a couple of videos of people trying to get this to work later on, including one by the Angry Video Game Nerd. It's basically just not ready for prime time. And at the same time, there's no real software that fully takes advantage of it. So, I mean, you're not going to be controlling F-Zero by moving your head left and right, because all that's going to do is basically move you left and right, but your head will move, but the picture will still be the same, except that the car is now moved. It makes no sense. Yeah. But it is interesting because it's, as far as I can tell, the first commercially available VR headset that's really reasonably priced, that can actually function with existing software. And, you know, it's probably the last useful one for the next 20 years. So it's got that going for it.
Which is nice.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, if you could get this thing working with the right video signals, you could plug this in and play Doom or Wolfenstein or Duke Nukem 3D. Any of those games where you don't really move your head up and down would work with this headset. And yes, I know Duke Nukem 3D had the slight up and down look options, but nobody really played that.
Exactly. Yeah. So this next headline I find interesting. Two young industry titans at the top of their game in a little tete-a-tete here, as movies and games should stay in their own lane.
The rise of the FMV game at the same time as many video game properties are getting the feature film treatment begs the question of whether or not they can be good bedfellows. Former president of 20th Century Fox, Strauss Zelnick, now head of Crystal Dynamics, says they can't, as, quote, a game is about mastering and winning. Movies are stories. Once you make the story interactive, it isn't a story anymore. A game, but not a story. End quote. Bobby Kotick, head of Activision, is taking a different tack, though. He moved Activision from Menlo Park, California to Los Angeles in 1992 because, quote, that's where the writers and the creators are. It sure wasn't the quality of life, end quote. Activision has already sold a reported 300,000 copies of Return to Zork since it launched in October, and they are expecting the game to account for $5 million worth of Activision revenue in the fiscal year ending in March.
Of course, the main thing I find hilarious about this, other than the fact that up until the end of last year, both of these individuals were still nearly 30 years later running companies in the video game industry, is that Strauss Zelnick will, of course, go on to be the CEO of Take-Two Interactive, where they make a little story-driven game series called Grand Theft Auto that our listeners may have heard of.
Yeah, but I mean, in his defense, Grand Theft Auto is about mastering and winning. It's not about experiencing a story in that sense. I mean, it really does emphasize that, you know, open world type thing. Yeah, there's a story. I'm one of those people who plays GTA games for the story, but, you know, it's no longer a story. You couldn't just cut it together and put that out as a movie. It doesn't work anymore in that sense. So I'm willing to go along with him there, that story is about about the storyteller taking somebody by the hand and not giving them at least the semblance of freedom of deciding where the story's going to go. And Bobby Kotick, on the other hand, is all about, you know, movie-like production values. FMV is the big story at Activision right now with Return to Zork. And if anybody wants to know more about the making of that game, please check out my interview with William Falk. Right now, still a patron exclusive. Gonna hit the feed at some point soon. Sorry, just plugging that, because we do go deep into that game. It's quite entertaining.
Well, I still think there's a lot of story in Grand Theft Auto. I mean, I do understand what you're saying, but it does still seem like there's a little more story in Grand Theft Auto than the 1993 version of Strauss-Zelnick would be comfortable with. However, to your point, I raise a counterpoint that Strauss-Zelnick was also still at Crystal Dynamics when they release a little game called The Horde.
Well, yeah, but The Horde is, I mean, the story elements of that, and calling them story elements is, yeah.
I know, but it's got FMV going.
Yeah, but the FMV doesn't really play a role in the game. I mean, the FMV is there like an intro, and at some point, you know, a former child TV actor is going to tell you that a banana is a sign of evolution being a lie or something. Sorry, couldn't help myself there. Yeah,
TV's own Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron. It's that's a great punchline. Okay.
Anywho, kind of adding in on top of this debate that we're seeing here from the heads of these companies, we can get the journalists involved as well, as we learn that interactivity is the new hype word.
If interactive ain't in the title, you might as well pack it in. Video game journalist OG Arnie Katz has subtitled his magazine Electronic Games as, quote, the magazine of interactive experiences, end quote. Virgin Games is renaming itself Virgin Interactive. This, of course, is happening as everyone is trying to launch interactive movies, with Tsunami announcing Man Enough, Mediavision announcing Critical Path, Hyperbole Studios has Quantum Gate. Broderbund has seen their business move dramatically by the advent of CD-ROM, with the format dominating their sales in just 12 months. But Doug Carlson, head of the company, was cautious, as the company's legacy titles may not continue to perform as well in the future, and the new world of CD-ROM could end up belonging to anyone, including upstarts.
Carlston. I'm going to need to start spell checking the names.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's
and I've
okay.
interviewed his brother, for God's sake. I should know this.
Yes, indeed.
Check out that interview. Very, very interesting, and also touches on this topic. So, but yeah, interactive. Everything has to have interactive in the title right now, because that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Just like,
I think, I think as much as anything, it's a symptom of the fact that everyone is convinced that this stuff is truly, truly going to go mainstream, but that the mainstream public is still not comfortable with the idea of a video game. But they understand existing media, and they understand what the name interactive, or what the word interactive means. And so interactive movies, interactive books, interactive whatever, they see as a way of making this feel more comfortable to the general public, and perhaps enticing some of these rubes to buy some of these horrible, horrible interactive movies.
You know what? I think that that's exactly where we are. And also, there is another factor. Designing good games is something that a relatively small percentage of people working in the industry can actually do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you jump on the hype train and just, film some stuff, and people are willing to buy it because of the novelty, well, then why would you bother building those really cool, well-developed games?
Yep.
I think that there's a huge element of that in all of this. Because, if you actually have to compete with the people who know how to make games, it's going to be a lot harder to get noticed, and the budgets are also getting so much bigger. I mean, we can't forget that this is right around the time when smaller teams are starting to be pushed aside, because you got to fill that CD somehow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But moving on to the computer space, while the OG journalists in the United States are pointing out that interactivity is the word of the present, the British magazine Edge sees the future in 3D.
UK's The Edge sees 2D imagery, even the pretty 24-bit color kind streamed off a shiny CD, as a dead end, and 3D worlds that are freely navigable as the only viable future for gaming. They may be a bit off about VR helmets being a part of that future, though.
Well, you can't win them all, but absolutely, this is what is just coming in, and I do believe, again, it's this idea of enticing the mainstream. Current video game graphics are seen as childish because they're very cartoon-like and is seen as a turnoff. So the reason that the not quite so technically knowledgeable entrepreneurs and companies here were thinking that the only way to get adults interested would be to have real people on the screen, hence interactive movies. What they didn't realize, because they weren't knee-deep in the technical journals, is that the 3D graphics revolution is coming, and that is going to allow the same sense of immersion by a more adult audience with the interactivity that is really necessary for a good game, unlike those interactive movies.
I completely concur. And I mean, and when we say that the existing computer graphics or video game graphics looked cartoony, that's actually sort of oversimplifying it, because a cartoon is more dynamic. A cartoon can zoom in, a cartoon can go out, the cartoon character can be big and can be small and so forth.
Yes.
If you look at a standard sprite-based game, that sprite is the same size on the screen no matter what happens. Unless you're familiar with it and accept that those given restrictions, if you're coming into it and seeing a game like that, it just looks terrible. It looks sterile because of that lack of flexibility. Moment you move to 3D, you can do all of that. All of that becomes suddenly possible. And
that's an excellent point.
Yeah. And that, and that I think was one of the big things that was hard for people to get their head around. But now interactive movie, you can do all those things. It just seems normal. It's just, you can only do the ones that they thought of ahead of time.
Yeah. But that new revolution is on the way. And one sign of that is id to make modding Doom easy.
Electronic Games previews id's upcoming Doom, a follow-up to Wolfenstein 3D. In addition to the more dynamic environments that allow walls at an angle, variable ceiling heights, lighting effects, and 4-player land-based multiplayer, id will also release technical information necessary for editing levels and creating editing tools. The initial shareware release will hopefully get people excited about enough to plunk down the $40 for the full game. The shareware version hit bulletin boards on December 10th, 1993.
This is just another example of why id, as what was essentially an indie developer, we would call them an indie developer today, crazy as that sounds at the time, was just so successful, is that they were so close to their customers, being gamers themselves and being so small and independent and being so locked in on the nascent World Wide Web. They saw the mods. There weren't many because it was hard, but they saw the mods being made for Wolfenstein 3D. They immediately recognized that this is something cool, and rather than being a big publisher with IP, being like, we have to stop this, we have to protect this, or whatever, these people that were gamers and hackers essentially themselves thought, that's really cool. This endears people to our games even more. Let's make this a feature rather than a bug, so to speak. Let's make it so instead of these modders having to go digging through our non-standard file formats to find this stuff, let's put these WAD files out there essentially unencrypted for all to see in the game's directory, so that people can go in and mod whatever the heck they want. And boy, was a community born from that.
Oh, definitely. And it really is. You're right. I mean, it's the hacker ethos combined with the online settings, so everything moves so much faster. I mean, if you think about in the early 70s, what David All doing is, 100 basic games. And he's collecting these games that people have done on mainframes, pass them along. That process of having to publish it, or maybe hopefully it shows up on your local machine and whatnot, was cumbersome. This is now going to spread like wildfire worldwide within months. It's going to be everywhere. And that spread also means anything that doesn't look as good as Doom, you might as well just get the hell out of the way.
Yep. And also, as I talked about some in the IT episode we did a few months back on my podcast, is this also has the ripple effect. And I doubt the id people were thinking of it this way at this time. Though I could be wrong. Maybe they were. But they create the next generation of game designers. And they help cement level design as a discipline. Because once it became possible to mod, and once people were releasing literally thousands and thousands of levels, it suddenly became very clear that there was a specific talent to level design, and some levels were just so much better than other levels. And there came to be a new priority, I think, on level design in even professional game development that didn't exist before. And as I said in the podcast too, not that good level design didn't exist before, not that World 1-1 of Super Mario Brothers isn't a masterclass of game design, but I think there was a whole paradigm shift towards level design being a key component of any really good game of certain genres. And I think Doom itself, with its well-designed levels, was certainly a part of that, but I think just the modding community that spiraled out of it was also key to that kind of paradigm shift in the way people thought about game design.
Oh, clearly. I mean, the profession didn't exist before that. And again, I'll pimp one of my own interviews, my interview with American McGee. He comes into it. Yeah, he had some basic programming knowledge, but his big break is as a level designer. And,
exactly.
It will change the way that we approach building games, that real separation between the people making the engine and the people. It's the John Carmack and John Romero.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That
exactly
clear dichotomy, the one guy who's basically, I'm just going to make the engine, and really have little to nothing to do with what the final game looks like. Which will also have certain downsides. See Quake, but
right. Yeah. But yeah, it's there's an earthquake happening here. Pun, I guess, partially intended. And modding definitely plays a role in that. But as some companies move boldly into the future, others remain stuck very much in the present, as Origin announces interactive movie.
Well, Origin Systems has announced that they are working on a new game with the working title Interactive Movie, which will give game designers all the tools of a movie director: lighting, chase cameras, camera angle positioning, etc. The goal will be to create the feeling of a real movie on a computer screen. Now, this is not Wing Commander 3. We're talking BioForge here. So, it is a slightly different approach. And have you ever played BioForge?
I have not.
Okay.
Played the heck out of Wing Commander 3, but never BioForge.
Okay, no, so BioForge is... They obviously, this whole chase camera thing and so forth doesn't really come to fruition. They don't truly pull that off in the game. It ends up playing and feeling a lot more like Alone in the Dark. pre-rendered backgrounds, 3D world, 3D character with textures. But yeah, it's with a lot of flexibility. I mean, it's the game that's famous for the fact that you could kill somebody, rip off their arm, and then use the arm as a club to beat other people up with it. But yeah, they're thinking their version of the interactive movie will be real-time 3D processing.
Right.
So they're already ahead a little bit. They're thinking ahead, but at the same time, they're going to be hitting a technological wall that's going to push them back to basically where Alone in the Dark was, for all practical intents and purposes.
Makes sense. Meanwhile, over at Sierra, they're not quite to the point of putting the actors on film yet, but that doesn't mean that Sierra doesn't see stars.
That's right. Sierra has hired an all-star cast of talent to voice the upcoming CD release of their supernatural adventure game, Gabriel Knight. Tim Curry, Mark Hamill, Michael Dorn, and Jim Cummings headline a who's who of geek-tastic star power.
Yeah, that game did have a great cast, let me tell you. Tim Curry can definitely make, as Gabriel Knight, can make a heterosexual man like myself feel a little bit uncertain in his sexuality, let me tell you.
The game oozes so much personality, especially by the standards of the time, that yes, you forgive the fact that most of the puzzles are garbage.
Yeah.
I know I played through the game, but with a massive hint sheet next to me the whole time. Yeah. And now they're not the only ones doing this. Access is also touting their get for upcoming adventure game Under a Killing Moon. They've got Brian Keith, at the time probably best known for Hardcastle and McCormick, and of course Superman's Margot Kidder. And they're going to get a few more big names for that game. But, you know, the fact that they're picking them up one at a time and releasing press releases for them in the various magazines is a sign of, you know, hey, this is something you want this. You want this, right? Yes, of course you want this.
Yeah. You know, just a complete tangent, but not too long before this recording, I had the opportunity to meet one of these people that started getting into these interactive movies a bit in the mid-90s, Mr. John Rhys Davies.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, you're right. Yes.
Who I added to my Lord of the Rings book as another signature. And, you know, you get your 10 seconds with them. And so I chose to use my 10 seconds to ask about getting involved with interactive movies in the mid-90s.
And what did you say?
You know, I mean, I got a pretty, you know, generic kind of standard answer. I don't think it was a false answer. It's just not a hugely revealing answer. But, you know, he said, and his whole career bears this out, that, you know, as an actor, he felt that actors should never be ashamed of any job, that all jobs are equally valid. You know, John Rhys Davies was trained as a Shakespearean actor and then, you know, went and did Sliders. So, I mean, I believe that. I believe that. And that he really believes that, and that it's also important to stay up on the new technologies and learn what's going on in the acting business. And, you know, and then I asked him if it was an interesting challenge, you know, in the back half of my 10 seconds, and he said that it was, and that he believes it's important for actors to continue to challenge themselves, because if you're not challenging yourself, then you're dying, and who wants to do that? So there's John Rhys Davies interactive movies. I bring that up to say I don't think that was the mainstream view of these things, because, you know, Margot Kidder would have been a great get in, let's say, 1979, was not anymore, with apologies to Miss Kidder. I know there's lots of issues there. I don't mean to be cruel about it, but, you know, she was not a great get anymore in 1993. You mostly had people that were on the wrong side of fame, either just starting their career or spiraling in their career, mixed in with a few character actors like Rhys Davies, who I think were generally intrigued by the whole thing, but, certainly didn't see it replacing their day jobs. So, yeah, it's interesting. They're getting actors, but it's, character actor Brian Keith, who's a very good character actor, but is a smaller name. And then Margot Kidder, someone who was once very big and no longer is.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they're touting these as great gets and legitimization of video games, and especially in the video game press, that sounds truly, wow, the people we know are actually going to be in a game. They're slumming with us. That is a lot of what this feel is. And I mean, Ken Williams has talked about this, how, he always was shooting for, the legitimacy that the film industry had. Talked about it with me in my interview with him and also in his book. And so I can imagine when he hires people like Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker to be in one of his games, it feels like, my ship has finally come in. I don't have to be afraid of what I'm doing anymore,
Right.
Or ashamed, sorry, not afraid, but ashamed of what I do.
I am no longer a peddler of smut. I am a peddler of high art.
Yes. Sorry, now I got a quote from People versus Larry Flint in my head that I'm not going to repeat on camera.
Okay. That is probably for the best. But now that we've been mired in the present again, let's return to our prognosticating a little bit as we learn standardization is the future.
A plethora of news items in this month's Byte magazine highlight the growing shift in the industry away from complicated proprietary solutions to both hardware and software and towards a unifying vision of intercompatible programs and systems. From Microsoft's promotion of the OLE 2.0 standard for inter-program data sharing to attempts to introduce plug-and-play hardware standards to the ISA bus world, to software supporting Microsoft's Sound API instead of sound card maker specific solutions, the world of tomorrow is a happy kumbaya paradise where everyone works and plays together.
I mean, I know you're being a little sarcastic at all the wide-eyed optimism here, Carl, but I gotta say, this is a kumbaya paradise compared to pre-1995.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we've talked about this before. Microsoft is already working on what will become Windows 95. And you can see here, and this is what I find fascinating, is there is such a concerted effort on their part to create the software to create both the software infrastructure and the hardware infrastructure necessary for that mainstream Windows 95 machine to go off without a hitch. To really be you turn it on, the machine works type of environment that we kind of expect nowadays from a PC. And the fact that so many of the things that we take for granted today are being established at this point was just really, really interesting, especially because they're very aware of it in the writing. They're like, we know these are all problems. And there's still this whole, skepticism. Will the hardware manufacturers go along with it? Will the software manufacturers go? Because they're all worried about, losing their position. And, well, they're right, because, let's face it, who still uses WordPerfect? It is interesting in that regard.
Absolutely. Of course, Microsoft's reasons for this may not be entirely altruistic, as it appears that Bill Gates wants little Johnny to learn to be an office drone.
That's right. Microsoft has unveiled their new line of kid-friendly applications, Creative Writer and Fine Artist, a word processor and paint program respectively. They will be the beginning of the Microsoft Kids line of programs to help get the young'uns in front of the computer doing something positive like learning how to make flyers and memos, just like mommy and daddy do at their dead-end soul-crushing office jobs.
A little bit of cynicism leaking through here, Carl. A little bit,
just a tiny little bit. I mean,
is this from the newsroom, or is this from the op-ed department down the hall?
No, I mean, I understand the motivation behind it, but it doesn't seem like a realistic option to have a kid-friendly word processor. I mean, print shop, kid-friendly. There was a graphics program with Garfield when I was a kid on the C64. Perfectly fine type of program. But, this, just looking at images of the software is just like, really? It feels a little awkward. Now, as a side note, as part of the PR tour, Bill Gates gave press interviews and he outlined for the New York Times what the computer of the future will be. And this connects a little bit with the previous story. He says that it will only be characterized by two things: the size of the screen and whether they are wired or wireless. And I felt that description says so much about all the efforts to get that environment there, and where we are today, that it's almost eerie. I mean, it's the size of the screen is the biggest determinant of, what you can do with the machine and therefore its functionality. And so I thought that was really cool. Yeah. But little Johnny does not need his own mini version of Word.
No, definitely not.
That's what WordPad is for, God damn it. Okay.
That's right. And then for your 2-year-olds, we have Notepad.
There you go. This is why I do most things in Notepad. Oh, damn. Okay.
I do most things in Notepad too, because I am lazy like that. No formatting, no problem. Anywho, moving on to an interesting piece of technology. Ahead Inc. readies virtual guitar.
Bedford, Massachusetts company Ahead Incorporated is preparing to show off their virtual guitar and virtual music software at CES come January. The plastic guitar controller will allow players to interact with actors pretending to play licensed rock recordings on a computer screen. The virtual guitar is a simplified plastic instrument with only a handful of chords, but should let many a player live out their rock and roll dreams.
I do find this interesting as someone who has spent way too much time with plastic guitar controllers. Not this one, obviously, but slightly more recent vintage.
Yeah, this one, I mean, it's more complicated than the Guitar Hero one because it actually has a string built into it that you can strum. Now, it doesn't go the full length of the guitar. But it is interesting, and it's also a Massachusetts company. Now, I wasn't really able to verify whether or not there was any links between this company and Harmonix. But considering that they're both coming out of New England, it just feels like there's gotta be a link at some point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
that just
especially the fact that this is it's coming out of Massachusetts, which is the home state of a little company called Harmonix.
Yeah, and I looked them up both on the map. I mean, they're not that far from one another. I'd have to go back and check my interview with Michael Dornbrook because he was also at Harmonix back in the day.
Yes, he was.
And he might be able to, he might have mentioned something along these lines, but yeah. It's interesting. Now, the co-founder of Ahead Inc., if you look at his LinkedIn page, he says he led the company developers of First Interactive Music Games, a game which spawned Guitar Hero, the highly successful video game by Activision. Now, but he is not involved with harmonics, according to his feed here.
Right. I think this is using spawned in the sense that a lot of people do, being like, I did this thing first, so everyone definitely took their idea from me.
Yeah.
But, yeah, he'd probably be an interesting interview.
Definitely. And so at some point we may have that discussion. Again,
indeed.
I have too many interviews. You do not want to know how big the backlog is right now. There's about 10 hours of interviews that I haven't even begun to edit yet. And I've got at least 2 more already signed up. So, at some point I will get to them all. I promise everybody. So, okay, moving on.
If you donate more to the Patreon, he'll get to them faster.
I'm not making that promise. Only so many hours in the day. But
I mean, if you start getting 50. If you start getting, $10,000 a month, you can quit your day job. So, I mean, my statement is true.
Well, this is true. This is true, yes. You need to turn it into a modal. He can do it if enough people,
I am technically correct, which is the best kind of correct.
Yes.
And speaking of bureaucracies, I think it's time for some corporate shenanigans. My favorite topic, as Sierra buys Cocktail Vision.
Nice pronunciation. So, U.S. publisher Sierra has bought French publisher Cocktail Vision, which will bring the French company famous for the Goblins games to the U.S. market and give Sierra a stronger European presence and a new source of educational software.
Yeah, obviously, since you've interviewed Ken Williams, you can speak even more to this than I can. But, Ken was one of the early people in the computer game industry of the time that realized it was time to go big or die. And that he makes a lot of moves like this in this period that are not just with the intent of shoring up game production in genres that Sierra's not as big in, but also to shore up offering software across a wide variety of productivity areas. In my experience, he's always been proud of the fact that Sierra was never really just a computer game or a video game company, but was always moving in many directions, for better or for worse.
Oh, definitely. And Cocktail Vision, even though they're known for a lot of often not great adventure games, Emmanuel is one of the absolute worst adventure games you will ever play. They did have a very strong position in the French educational software market. You could almost put them on the same level as a Broderbund in the United States. So this was a huge get for them. Plus, it also gave them a much stronger position for distribution in Europe. At this point, I think they had started their own distribution channels, but obviously they weren't as well established as Cocktail.
Mm-hmm.
The games that Cocktail ends up being able to supply to the North American market are never going to be top tier. But it's one of those situations where Cocktail is going to have a whole bunch more money to up the ante in their own productions, and Sierra is going to be able to have more product to put on the shelves that is not necessarily just games.
Yeah, and like you said, making those contacts, because you see a ton of deals in this mid-90s period that are either American companies buying their way into Europe or European companies buying their way into America. Not so much always for the IP, even though some of these deals do also net them IP, but because they want those distribution networks. That is kind of the key to everyone's international expansion in this period, and it's moving both ways across the Atlantic.
Oh, definitely, because as the European market slowly moves away from the home computers, moves into the PC, suddenly the stuff you've been making in the States is viable, and the vice versa. I mean, most of these European companies have still been making stuff for the Atari ST and the Amiga primarily. Suddenly now they're also making it for the PC. Now they can finally grab a foothold in North America.
Absolutely. And speaking of those Broderbund people you mentioned just a moment ago, Maxis breaks free from Broderbund.
SimCity makers Maxis have been handing over distribution duties for their games to Broderbund, but not anymore. This ended earlier in the year, causing Broderbund to lose 50% of its affiliated label revenue, but Maxis wasn't about to just go it alone, but has also started distributing other developers' titles itself, starting with Baseball for Windows by Miller Associates.
And this goes back to exactly what I was saying above on that 3DO, or I'm sorry, Jaguar developer headline that we had. Maxis at this point wants to make the jump to be a full-fledged, real big-name publisher. They've kind of identified the same thing that Ken Williams has identified, that in this period, with rising development costs, that it is time to go big or die. And this is the beginning of a push that Maxis is making to try to become a big publicly traded company in the vein of an EA or an Activision. It doesn't quite work out that way, as we will no doubt see as the headlines develop over the next couple of years. But just like the Jaguar development deal, that's what this is all about, is becoming a larger diversified publisher. On the other side of this deal, while you have interviewed Gary Carlston, I have interviewed Doug Carlston. And in regards to the affiliated label program, I asked him about that because they had one and it was never very big. As this shows, we're losing Maxis, is 50% of that revenue up in smoke. And as he explained it to me, the affiliated label thing was something that they started up, of course, after Activision and EA were already doing it. EA was the pioneer of this, but it was something that they started up really as a way of scouting out potential acquisitions. And it never really worked out. I got the sense from talking to them that they kind of got disillusioned by the whole affiliated label thing. So I think by this point, it's fair to say they're really trying not to be in that business anymore. So while I'm sure the revenue hit is not pleasant, it's really not a part of the business that the company's even really that interested in anymore, because it never really turned into the acquisition goldmine that Doug Carlston had been hoping for.
And I can totally understand that. And this is coming from the same article that we mentioned earlier with Carlston saying, the new CD-ROM world, we've got some hits with the new versions of the Carmen Sandiego games on CD-ROM, but there's no way of knowing who's going to be the next big hit, what's going to come down the pipeline. And, that is really the problem, because nobody knows what's going to be successful in this new arena. I mean, old games, who cares about them? What do you got for me today? And it's, as Bill Gates told Ken Williams, it's a hit-driven business, and he did not want to be in a hit-driven business.
Absolutely. And at this point, Broderbund is also very leery about being in a hits-driven business. This is the period where they're really trying to cultivate their evergreen lines, like their print shop, like Family Tree Maker a little later down the line, stuff like that. And so they're kind of ready to mostly leave this whole games thing behind, quite frankly. And this is just another example of that. But one person who surprisingly is not willing to leave this whole games thing behind is one Mr. Sir Clive Sinclair. Sort of. As Sinclair gets into software retailing.
The man who once, allegedly, did not want to be remembered for bringing the world Jet Set Willie is now in the game-selling business. Sinclair Direct, a mail-order software company specializing in games, doesn't just sport Sir Clive's name, but he is also its director, while his son, Crispin Sinclair, is the company's managing director. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure this is more his son's initiative than his own initiative, which is why I said sort of. But yeah, this is something I was not aware of. I mean, obviously it's just a footnote, but it is an interesting footnote. I did not realize that Sinclair's son had tried to get involved in the game business.
Well, and this is after years and years after Sir Clive sold off his interest in the computer business to Amstrad. There's also after his, I wanted to say C4, the C5 vehicle failed. I believe this is also after his second attempt, which were basically little motorized scooters, also failed. And now he is, there's not a lot going on. And the weird thing is that this is from PC Zone magazine in the UK. And there's going to be an article about the foundation of this company in the February issue. But in this issue, there's a one-page ad. And it's this really, really terrible painted version of their heads on just their heads sitting on a pedestal. Almost looks like the heads in a jar from Futurama. It's just bizarre beyond bizarre. And it feels quite undignified. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
Not sure how long it survives, but hey, it's there.
And now we need to have a somber moment of silence as we bid a fond farewell and an RIP to the Apple II.
In November, Apple quietly discontinued the production of the Apple IIe, the last Apple II model still in production. An Apple II expansion card for the Mac would still be produced for a few more years, but the standalone machines compatible with the original Trinity machine are no more.
They will be survived by so many Apple II machines in schools for several more years to come.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's the end of an era in a way. Obviously, the Apple II, even the Apple IIe's period of relevance, is long gone by this point. But, it chugged along for an incredibly long time for such a primitive system, for something that came out in 1977. I realized there were updates, improvements, big memory increases after that an Apple IIe is not a 1977 Apple II. But still, this was a time when that kind of permanence wasn't really achieved by much yet. Obviously now the PC and the Mac, the PC compatible and the Mac have achieved that kind of permanence. But at that time, nothing had yet. It looked like the PC was a good bet too, but obviously the Apple II was several years older. So, this was definitely the end of an era.
Oh, yeah. And it is a little bit sad to see the machine end like this. I mean, the 2E, I wanted to say it launched in 81, the 2E, or 82?
I want to say 83, but I actually have to look this up. I'm not going to leave this one to the Department of Corrections.
Link to the wiki.
Yeah, January 1983.
Okay, so in many ways, the 2E is a contemporary of the C64. So the C64 is going to last one more year, or a little right. Under a year longer. But it's not going to end just because the company decided it to move on to other models. And but yeah, it is the end of that old school system. It's oh well.
I mean, it's the computer that bridged the hacker era and the commercial era. It was a computer designed by a consummate hacker, designed in a very quirky, hackery kind of way, but that ended up being the longest lasting of the early commercial machines made for use by a wider, though still not wide, general public. So, yeah.
Very good way of putting it.
All right. Well, they're not the only ones dying. Or are they dying? Amiga? Dead? Not at the World of Commodore show in Cologne, it ain't.
The annual World of Commodore show in Cologne, Germany attracted more than 120,000 people crowded into the convention center, with Saturday alone having an attendance of over 50,000. While games played a big part, the massive number of new graphics and productivity tools designed to exploit the HEA chipset made the show something of a standout.
Believe the word you're looking for is not standout, but swan song.
Well, yeah, it's kind of weird because it's taken everybody a year or two to finally get up to speed with the AGA chipset. It's they've got all these graphic programs that not 100% toe-to-toe with Photoshop, but could go toe-to-toe with Photoshop, get most of the stuff done. It almost feels like this could be going somewhere. Of course, Commodore is so broken at this point that it's not going to go anywhere. But and yeah, I mean, and even if Commodore weren't falling apart, I mean, it was never going to go any huge place. Could it have limped along, particularly in Europe, for a while longer as the budget option, etc., like it had been for the past few years? Yeah, probably. But the end was coming either way. Oh yeah,
and this was just a brief moment of pride before the fall right here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this show, World of Commodore, there were several of them around the world every year. We talked about the one in California a couple months ago. But yeah, this was the last hurrah. It will never be this good again.
And of course, it's not a surprise that would happen in Germany, because Commodore had an outsized presence there, far beyond any other territory was in. And we're not just talking about Commodore 64 and Commodore Amiga game machines, but in the early years of the IBM PC, Commodore computers were the de facto business computers of Germany.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's long gone by 1993, but yeah, the Commodore love was always particularly strong.
Oh, I know. And I was living in Germany at this time, and I mean, you couldn't throw a stone without hitting somebody that had an Amiga or a C64 at home. It just was the nature of the beast. Even if you had a PC, you still had a C64 someplace hooked up. It was crazy.
Absolutely. And now for a different kind of RIP, as Brian Moriarty leaves The Dig.
LucasArts' long-in-development game The Dig, based on an idea by Steven Spielberg, has lost Infocom veteran Brian Moriarty and will now, according to the company, be finished by Hal Barwood and Dan Grossman.
Arrested Development narrator. It won't be.
Exactly. I only included this one because the long, arduous journey to completion of The Dig is a story that I just feel merits a mention from time to time.
Absolutely. Of course, Brian Moriarty was the second head of development, producer, whatever, on this game. The first being friend of the show, Noah Falstein. And Hal Barwood and Dan Grossman would be the third of 4 regimes before it is finally finished by Sean Clark.
Yes. Complicated, messy, and the development was pretty messy too. Was a mess too.
This game definitely needs a no-clip documentary. I would love to see the no-clip documentary of the making of the Dig.
Just have some of the people who worked on it go into cold sweats, and yeah, that would be fun.
Oh, I know. Some of them do not talk about it. Brian Moriarty, I think, being one of those individuals. But that would be fast. Do you know No Clip? They're really good.
No, I'm not familiar with their work at all. Okay, you got to send me a link. Send me a link.
Yeah, they have a YouTube channel. They make fantastic documentaries. They recently did an official tie-in one with Valve for Half-Life for the anniversary, which is how they came to my attention. Most of their stuff, though, is not official tie-in like that.
Okay.
Most of it's just doing it on their own. They do YouTube video game documentaries where they interview tons of interesting people.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is one worth singing the praises of. There are a lot of terrible video game history videos on the interwebs, but No Clips documentaries are not among them. They're very good.
Excellent. Well, I will have to check them out because, okay, I'm just looking at their channel now. Wow. Okay. No, I'm in.
Yeah. I think they could do a fascinating look at the Dig. Not that anyone wants to talk about it, but if people were to talk about it, that would be a great documentary. All right, we're almost there, people. Moving on to our online news now. 3DO goes online in Omaha.
U.S. West Communications, one of the 7 Baby Bell telephone operators, has chosen the 3DO company's machine as the technology foundation for a test of interactive entertainment, educational and informational programming, home shopping, and video on demand via a communications network. If the FCC approves the test, users would be able to use a 3DO-based set-top box to access these services. The units will not include CD-ROM drives, making them unable to play 3DO software, and apparently no telephone or cable operators have shown an interest in making devices that play pre-recorded data part of their set-top boxes.
Now, the thing I find particularly interesting about this, I mean, it's another one of these nascent, everyone's trying to figure out what it means to be online, what can be done online. The infrastructure companies like the telephone networks and the cable networks want to make sure that it's their infrastructure being used in this new online world, so they're investing in it. I mean, that's all the stuff that we've talked about before. But the thing I find most interesting about this test in particular is that that members of the 3DO hardware development team form much of the basis for the company Web TV a couple of years down the line, which specializes in this kind of attempt to do set-top boxes that somewhat function as computers hooked up to your television to access the internet. So I find it very interesting in light of that future that 3DO was doing this experimentation in 1993.
Yeah, that is a very, very interesting connection. And those same people, or at least the Web TV company, will be purchased by Microsoft, and 2 of the competing proposals for what will become Xbox. One will come from the Web TV people, and another one from an internal Microsoft team. And the web TV suggestion actually looks a lot like what the Xbox ends up being. There's
yes,
DNA there.
And basically, even though they lost the battle, they won the war, because the Xbox 360 was actually built by those web TV people.
Well, yeah.
So, what was designed by them?
Yeah.
So, I that's the thing I find very interesting about 3DO. The 3DO's legacy is actually mammoth, and it's not because of the 3DO, it's because of the Xbox 360. Because I consider the Xbox 360 to be, this is a little bit of a tangent. We're near the end of the episode. It's fine. I consider there to be really only 4 truly seminal, groundbreaking consoles in the history of the industry. And what I mean by that is that they were not just, or even not necessarily, technological breakthroughs, but also business model breakthroughs, cultural breakthroughs, distribution breakthroughs, et cetera. There was the VCS, which was the first, and I'm not counting the fact that consoles were invented before that. I'm talking about the meat of the market when they really took off. There was the Atari VCS, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sony PlayStation, and kind of a weird mishmash combination of the Xbox and Xbox 360, because some of the stuff, like the hard drive and Xbox Live, was started on the Xbox but really didn't reach their full potential till the 360. And the 3DO people had a lot of input on how that revolutionary Xbox model of online distribution, online purchasing, etc., came to be. So this is a tiny story. It's a footnote, but it's a footnote with big implications, because this is presumably, I don't know that they were all on staff at this point at 3DO. I don't know the staff movement. This is presumably the first tiny little baby steps getting taken towards an ecosystem that Microsoft would more fully realize a couple of decades later.
And very, very true. And the fact that it's not going to have a CD-ROM drive and require all the content to be delivered over the phone lines would have provided that technical challenge that having to deal with it would push them to be thinking basically of what would become web TV. It makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And from there would become some of the features in Xbox.
Yeah,
so
of course.
It's all connected. That's why you have to wait a few years. And, that's why we don't do 5-year jumps. Because it's only when you do the 20, 30, 40, 50-year jumps, that's when these interesting trends start to appear, and where you can start putting these puzzles together.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that quite a few members of the 3DO team had worked on a little thing called the Amiga. Just saying. I mean,
Well, one or two.
There's some DNA in there. So,
absolutely, there is. But moving on to a slightly different part of the online picture emerging, businesses see the future of commerce in Mosaic.
A new free program is igniting the hopes and dreams of many that a unified vision of the networked information highway future may finally be upon us. That program, Mosaic. Based on the hyperlinked browser tech of Tim Berners-Lee, Mosaic is quickly becoming a standard for text, image, and sound distribution on the internet. Many companies are already implementing ad-based sites, and others are developing ways to use the tech for the browsing of goods for online shopping.
Yeah, I think that might just work out.
You think so? I mean, it seems like such a outlandish thing to do, having one program that accesses all websites as opposed to individual software that, where's AOL going to be with its keywords if we keep going this way?
That's right. We need our walled gardens, damn it.
Yeah, that's the only way to make it efficient and cutting edge.
Cyberspace is too frightening.
Now, another New York Times article this month talked about the myriad of CD-ROM systems currently on the market and how early adopters may get burned if their choice does not become dominant in the still non-compatible system jungle. And this is relevant here because what the browser's doing is standardizing everything. It's like, you know, well, you can buy this pre-made media or just grab whatever you want on this new standard. The hyperlink standardization of data distribution is, as some would say, not perfect, but again, it goes back to that story from earlier about standardization makes the world go round and is going to make everything easier. It doesn't have to be the best standard in the world, but once you got it, holy Moses, what you can do with it.
Then you just gotta add a series or two of tubes and, baby, you got a stew going. R.I.P. Carl Weathers.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. May he rest in peace.
All right, that's essentially it for the real news, but we end with, we always do, with a little bit of general interest. Where we have just learned that the Fantastic Four movie pushed back.
Apparently, the visual effects for the upcoming Fantastic Four movie have taken longer than expected and will push back the release of the movie to January.
I assume that their Pedro Pascal simulacrum was not quite ready to go yet in 1993.
Well, considering Pedro Pascal was probably like 15 at the time, or maybe 20 at the most. Yeah. So this is the Roger Corman version of the movie.
Yes.
And all good geeks have seen it, even though
it's. Oh, no, I was going to say it's funny that they say that it's being delayed because the special effects are taking longer than expected, because my response to that is, what special effects exactly are you referring to?
Hey. All CGI Human Torch and City he flies through for 1993 standards was pretty damn impressive. I mean, I will defend the CGI in that movie when you compare it with similarly budgeted movies of the time. Don't compare it to Jurassic Park. I mean, Jurassic Park just came out and raised the standard, but if you compare it to Lawnmower Man, it doesn't look bad for the budget. But yes.
Yes. What did they call Roger Corman again? The king of B movies, was it?
Yes. And well-deserved title that. So yeah, so this is the movie that's never going to come out. And I'm including it here not just because it's general geek history, but because the idea of these superhero movies are really so deeply connected with what will become mechanics of video games. I mean, the swinging through the cities in Spider-Man, because this month we also get the story that James Cameron's Spider-Man movie, we all remember seeing that in the theater, starring Johnny Depp, is set for a 1995 release. So that's not going to happen.
Is that the Spider-Man movie where the boat sinks? I forget.
There's been so many at this point; it's hard to keep track.
No, that's James Cameron.
Oh my goodness! Oh Jesus! Yeah, sorry. I forgot.
We do record these late, where Carl resides.
Yeah, it's only 1:37 in the morning. Okay, and. For Christmas, Christmas Day, we get the opening of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, offshoot of the Batman animated series is hitting theaters. It's this renaissance of superheroes. It's the combination of visual effects making stuff that was only really possible on a comic book page or in a cartoon, viable on a big screen. But it's not quite there yet. It's all of those technologies come together with the mainstreamization of video games, making people more open to accepting this kind of over-the-top stuff. I'm a strong believer that had video games not been as popular and as entrenched in society, things like the popularity of the Marvel movies probably never would have taken off. We never could have sold that on a large scale the way that we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mask of the Phantasm remains one of the finest of the theatrically released Batman movies.
Oh, yes, definitely, by far. By far, I mean.
Yes. In large part because they actually based it on the comic books. A novel concept with the plot being primarily derived from Batman Year 2.
Yes. I do not disagree with anything in that statement. I would put it probably second only to the 1966 Batman movie. So, which, in all fairness, is very, very accurate to the comics of the time. But that's another issue entirely.
It is. Frank Miller was not writing comic books yet in 1966, let alone Denny O'Neil.
Well, it was
Neil Adams. Neil Adams might have been.
He wasn't writing serious. Denny O'Neil, no, he wasn't in it quite yet, but he was close. I mean, 69, he's already in there, so it's yeah,
getting close,
very close. He was definitely inspired by it. Okay, so that's the end of our news for today. The end of our time jump. Oh no, it's not quite, because we still have the quote of the month.
That's right.
And here, this one is fun. Ex-Bitmap brother Sean Griffiths leads a team of 5 coders working on Rise of the Robots, which had so many previews in so many magazines this month. So here's a quote from Edge magazine, which also had it on the cover. He's confident that the product will be highly regarded for many reasons. Quote, "It's not a conventional beat-em-up. We're using robots that fight and act unusually with a very high level of artificial intelligence that has never been seen before. We'll definitely have one over on Street Fighter 2. End quote. Whether or not you meant the C64 version is another issue entirely.
And whether he actually succeeded in having one over on the C64 version is a matter for debate.
No, it's not, because you can beat that game by pressing up and kick.
Yes. I'll finish your quote.
Yes, sorry. And quote, "I wanted to do an interactive movie type game, but I wanted to make a good game out of it, as opposed to having brilliant images and a dire game." End quote.
Well, funny you should mention that. There is one thing quite accurate in this quote, though. It does have a high level of artificial intelligence that has never been seen before, and would also not be seen in the game because they actually never got around to that part of making the game. It essentially has no artificial intelligence.
Well, they kept talking about how they had this table system where if you use the certain move too often, it would jump to a different part of the table to determine what move the computer AI would then implement.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's...
Yeah, no. Retro Gamer did a making of Rise of the Robots, and it doesn't have a lot of information because none of the principals on Rise of the Robots, including one Mr. Sean Griffiths, ever want to talk about the game. So they were only able to interview one of the artists on the game for the feature. So there wasn't a lot of like high-level design decision information, the artist could impart. But the sense from that interview is that they spent all of their time making the brilliant, just to quote the quote, the brilliant images and didn't end up getting around to doing the rest, which is why they ended up with a dire game.
Yes. And that makes perfect sense, considering also that they released it on everything that had a CPU, it felt like. It almost feels like he's buying into his own hype at this point, and hasn't actually thought through what it takes to get a game shipped. But, it'll be out in time for whatever, and it's going to suck. It is going to suck. Oh well. So that was my quote of the month. There's also the worst ad of the month. There's a link to it in the show notes. It's an ad for the Cliffhanger games, and based off of the Stallone movie. And I just felt that this ad was so bad that I needed to link to it so everybody else had to see it. It showed up in a bunch of magazines, but it's Sylvester Stallone hanging off of a rock and looking sort of to the side, maybe at the camera, like, what the frag am I doing here? And you just see these lines, and he's thinking to himself, I hope they don't hit my Jeep. And it's just these voices, from down below. So he was apparently kicked these people off the mountain, and they're falling down.
Yes.
It's just bad. It's really, really bad. So, that's all I got. Do you have anything to say to that?
You've summed it up very well.
Excellent. So, with that being said, what, kind sir, would you consider to be the word of the episode?
Well, Carl, there is really only one word that can capture all of the hype around December 1993, and that is interactivity.
Very good. That is an excellent word for this episode. Now,
Absolutely.
That being said, please remind everybody where they can find your fine work.
Of course, we've always got the podcast going on at podcast.theycreateworlds.com, the parent website, theycreateworlds.com, where myself and my co-host Jeffrey Dom do our deep dives into topics in the history of video game industry twice a month, every month. As we mentioned at the top of the episode, we're in the middle of a two-part look at the Mass Effect games at the moment, the original Mass Effect trilogy, rather. We're not touching Andromeda, as many didn't. And after that, we are going to actually look at something very germane to what we were talking about today, which is the Sega Saturn and how that whole thing shook out.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to that. And remember, everybody, that we will be having our first Patreon exclusive live show, joint venture between Video Game Newsroom Time Machine and the They Create Worlds podcast. So if you're a patron of either one, you will get access to this live event the last Friday of February, which, if I look at a calendar, which probably would have been something good to do.
It's not going to be the last Friday of February,
Carl. Crap, you're right. Tomorrow's the last Friday of February. It's going to be the 1st of March, I guess. Or do you want to do the last Thursday of February?
No.
What sounds like a better idea? Damn you, February, for only having 29 days. Damn you.
I'm definitely not doing it March 1st either. I'm sorry. I didn't look at a calendar. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out on the 29th, and Dune Part 2 comes out on the 1st. So Those days are sacrosanct. I didn't realize that would actually be when we're talking about abstract concepts about the last Friday of this or that.
How about the 25th then? Let's do it before the game comes out so you still have a clear mind.
25th.
Okay, so we're going to do it on Sunday, the 25th of February. And so that our good man Alex can play some Final Fantasy VII. Okay.
And watch some Doom Part 2.
Oh, that's true. That's coming out too. I got to see if I got to find somebody who's willing to go to the movies with me to watch that. That'll be fun. Okay, then. Alex, thank you as always for coming along on this journey, and everybody, see you next time. Have fun.
Bye.
Quick question. The black and white figures behind you are from what? Right behind your head. There's two black and white figures.
Oh, yes. That is 50s Wanda and 50s Vision.
Gotcha.
Vision.
Okay. Yeah, because I couldn't read the logo for the series, so I wasn't sure.
Yep.
Okay, very cool. I dig it. Now what you need to get is Office Vision with his Commodore 64. Now, that would be kick-ass.
Yes. Love it.
Okay.
Then he can play Street Fighter 2 on it.
If you want to call it that, yeah. And that is a stretch. Okay. 1, 2, 3.